Common things science still can't explain. Fingerprints. That's right, the first entry on this list is something that we all have access to at our fingertips. And that's because it literally is our fingertips, or more specifically, our fingerprints. I think we all know that everybody has fingerprints, and beyond that, we all have unique fingerprints. And we also know that the fingerprints your cousin leaves on the glass in every device is really annoying. But beyond the existence and uniqueness of fingerprints, what is there not to know? And the answer is, well, the purpose of fingerprints to begin with. Interestingly, we actually know a lot more about the origin of fingerprints rather than the purpose of fingerprints. Obviously, in modern times, the fingerprint is an extremely useful tool, most commonly used in forensics investigations and also while opening your iPhone 6. And while those are definitely interesting use cases for our fingertips, the human body didn't spend hundreds of thousands of years just to develop fingerprints for biometric data purposes. And like the title of this video suggests, the true purpose of fingerprints is still relatively unknown, although there is two primary theories. But before we get into those, I want to actually explain quickly how we even get fingerprints in the first place. When you were a little fetus in your mother's womb, your fingerprints surprisingly were one of the earliest defining features developed on your entire body, obviously after your arms and hands. And these unique designs are carved into your fingertips through the pressure of amniotic fluid in your mother's womb. The pressure of this fluid, coupled with the growth rate of your fingers and other unique factors, are what cause the consistently unique design of your fingerprint, which is really interesting. Your fingerprint isn't genetic whatsoever, and identical twins do not share the same fingerprint. And that same fingerprint you develop early on in your mother's womb, you will keep until the day you die, which is also super interesting. But not quite as interesting as the two running theories on why we even have fingerprints in the first place. The first theory is that we have fingerprints to improve grip. This theory states that the grooves on your finger act like tread on a tire and are intended to allow you to grip, hold, and throw things easier. And this theory makes sense and is definitely valid, and there is even evidence to support this claim. And the other primary theory for why we have fingerprints is actually for tactile reasons. This theory states that we have fingerprints to help us sense vibrations and to feel textures more fully and effectively, enhancing our sense of touch. And once again, there is evidence to support this claim as well. And while both of these theories are valid and seem extremely logical, and both share evidence that can back up their claims, there's not yet any concrete evidence proving a specific purpose for your fingerprint. Alzheimer's. If you're watching this video, it's likely that you don't have Alzheimer's. But if you do have Alzheimer's, then it's likely you've seen this video before and just don't remember it. Regardless, Alzheimer's is unfortunately more common than you think, and most people watching this video have likely experienced Alzheimer's in one way or another. The reality of Alzheimer's is horrifying and truly upsetting, and that is coming from a bystander's perspective. I can only imagine the experience of somebody dealing with the trauma firsthand. But for how common Alzheimer's is and how much awareness is being brought to it these days, there are still so many things that are just completely unknown when it comes to Alzheimer's. I think it's important to note first and foremost that Alzheimer's and dementia are not the same thing, and while they are related, they're not interchangeable. And on top of that, Alzheimer's is not a natural part of human progression. While cognitive decline is normal as you age, the rapid and detrimental decline that happens with Alzheimer's is nowhere near normal. And for that reason, it's not called old-timers, it's called Alzheimer's. And I'm not even making this up. When I was a kid, I swear to God, I thought it was called old-timers because old people got it. And I'm just really hoping I'm not the only one who thought that. But tossing my own personal cognitive decline to the side, what is the cause of Alzheimer's? And the answer is complicated. As of today, the most common theory is that a combination of age-related brain changes, genetic factors, and environmental and lifestyle influences play a role in the development of Alzheimer's, although the exact biological root cause of the disease is still unknown. Basically meaning that there's a lot of ways you could potentially get Alzheimer's, like smoking all your life, or working shift work and having a bad circadian rhythm, or potentially being genetically predisposed. And while all of these may be a contributing factor, there's not yet one underlying causality. But with that being said, as of now, there are still two primary biomarkers that are believed to be tied to Alzheimer's. The first is amyloid beta plaques. And what amyloid beta plaques are actually buildup of amyloid beta, which is a part of amyloid precursor protein. What does amyloid precursor protein do in the brain, you might ask? Science doesn't know that either, but it's believed, but not proven, to have something to do with brain development. Regardless, patients with Alzheimer's will see this amyloid beta protein not being properly absorbed in the brain, causing it to clump together and create plaques. causing the eventual rapid decline in cognition. And the reason for this is because these amyloid plaques are actually toxic to the brain and cause cell death within your brain, which is why typically in Alzheimer's patients, you will see brains with massive holes in them, which honestly just adds a whole new layer of disturbing to this disease. But even the role of these amyloid plaques are debated, because recently there have been medications specifically designed to destroy these amyloid plaques in the brain. And unfortunately, these tests have not bred positive results, which has caused scientists to question whether or not this plaque is the root cause or simply a byproduct of a deeper, more unknown root cause. Oh yeah, and the other biomarker associated with Alzheimer's is another protein used in the brain known as tau. And similar to the other protein we just discussed, for patients with Alzheimer's, the tau in the brain is not used properly and is not absorbed and becomes tangled and creates, once again, toxic clumps in the brain, causing cell death and cognitive decline. So yeah, although it may seem like we know quite a bit about Alzheimer's, there's so much more we have to learn before we are able to make any sort of meaningful development in prevention and hopefully cure. Animal migration. Migration by far is one of the most underrated animal superpowers. Like seriously, just imagine being able to be anywhere and being able to then navigate to a specific location, usually across an entire continent, just because. Migration is a necessary survival mechanism for countless species of animals. And it's actually really well understood why certain species migrate. The reason depends on the species, but the most common reasons for migration are either to feed, breed, or to escape harsh climates like cold winters or hot summers. And that is simple and something we truly understand. But it's not the why of migration that's unexplained, it's the how. Like just think about it. How do these animals know consistently year over year not only when to go, but exactly where to go? You could give a lot of people today a car and a physical roadmap and they would still get lost trying to go to a specific location. But if you just tell a butterfly that they've got to fly 2,000 miles to get laid, they're already gone before you could even tell them what direction to go. And it's so amazing, in fact, that we still to this day don't understand how animals know where to migrate, or more specifically, how to get to their point of migration. Birds, whales, sea turtles, and even insects are all examples of animals that migrate. And for most of them, the places they go to migrate are rather specific, although where they may be living in their off-season is kind of random. However, every year, they consistently know, no matter where they are, where to go. And that phenomenon is truly amazing. And while in 2025, humans have GPS, Google Maps, and now self-driving cars, we still get lost a lot. And this thought process has led researchers to believe that animals have something that we don't. And recent studies have shown that this could potentially be true. And one example that research has recently shown was that some species of birds, specifically pigeons, were able to sense the Earth's magnetic field. And first of all, I'm just curious how they even found this out in the first place. Like, I can only imagine two scientists just sitting a pigeon down in the lab, looking at him and just asking, "Do you feel anything?" With the pigeon only to respond, "North." And this is a skill known as magnetoreception. And I'll be honest, I wish I had magnetoreception, because that sounds cool as hell. Regardless, with the discovery of pigeons being able to sense the Earth's literal magnetic field, this one answer has led to many more questions. Like, how many other animals share this ability? And what other abilities exist in the animal kingdom that we don't even know about yet? And for animals with this ability, how do they even use this knowledge of the magnetic field to navigate properly and accurately? It's truly amazing. And I guess the human equivalent of this would be trying to understand how your broke, drunken uncle always makes his way down to Florida every time winter comes in Michigan. Like, your drunken uncle could be anywhere in the northern hemisphere for 7 months out of the year. But somehow, as soon as it just gets a little chilly, he teleports to Florida. But nobody knows how he got there. It's just like that. The placebo effect. The placebo effect is a staple in modern medicine testing because of how prevalent this effect is. To summarize the placebo effect, it's essentially just suggestibility. It's your mind believing something to be true and your body kind of following suit. And while that's a bit of an oversimplification, the results of the placebo effect are amazing, but also mysterious. The placebo effect is so strong and so common that anytime a new drug is tested to bring to market, they literally have to test the new drug that's being proposed against a placebo to make sure that the drug is actually effective and not just seeming effective due to the placebo effect. For example, let's just say you're trying to develop a new drug that helps people with stomach pain. Now, let's say for a study, you find 100 people that have frequent stomach pain. You divide this group into two smaller groups, a treatment group and a placebo group. All 50 people in the treatment group receive the actual medication you're testing, and all 50 people in the placebo group receive, well, a sugar pill, a placebo, a drug that does nothing. It's not even a drug. Now, here's the kicker. Everybody in this test is under the assumption that they are actually taking the active medicine. And after consistently taking the medicine for, let's say, a week, you have to review the results. And this is where the placebo effect actually comes into play. Because let's say after a week of taking the placebo, 25 out of the 50 people in the placebo group say that they noticed less stomach pain. That is kind of the benchmark that the treatment group has to surpass. Meaning that if the treatment group also reports a 25% decrease in stomach pain, it's actually not proven effective. In that case, it's about as effective as a placebo. For this medication for stomach pain to be proven effective, there has to be more people in the treatment group that feel better than people in the placebo group. And this oversimplified, poorly explained explanation is what's known as a double-blind placebo study. And it's kind of the gold standard for eliminating bias when it comes to testing brand new medications. Now here's the thing. With all of this being said, how does the placebo effect even work? And the answer is, we actually don't know that much about it. Researchers that have been studying the placebo effect from a psychological and neurological angle both kind of believe that this effect is linked to a brain's release of endorphins and other chemicals in the anticipation of a positive effect, essentially meaning that because your body is expecting to feel better, it already kind of feels better in advance. But this isn't proven and is really only a going theory. And despite there being literally decades of study on the placebo effect up until this point, the exact mechanisms behind the placebo effect are completely unknown, making one of the staples of modern medicine testing an effective and life-saving mystery. The Twilight Zone. No, not that Twilight Zone, this Twilight Zone. Home of this, and this. The Twilight Zone is located 200 to 1,000 meters below the ocean surface. And it's known as the Twilight Zone because it is a region underwater where sunlight barely penetrates. It's too dark for any sort of photosynthesis, but it's not quite pitch black yet. And it's this unique region that is one of the least explored habitats on all of planet Earth. One notable resident of this area is the lanternfish, which is pretty cool, but also completely insane, and kind of goes to show how weird this area is. Like, we all know that jellyfish are like just weird creatures, but deep sea jellyfish are on a whole nother level. Like, I was just watching a documentary where some jellyfish literally asexually reproduce and basically just spawn new jellyfish, kind of like plants. And jellyfish as a whole are just kind of crazy entities. Like, they're alive, but they're not. It's just so wild. But that's not the mystery here. It has nothing to do with jellyfish per se. The Twilight Zone, like I mentioned, is one of the least explored areas, and for good reason too. The pressure that deep underwater is immense, and coupling that pressure with the sheer darkness and travel time and specialized equipment required to even navigate through this area makes any sort of Twilight Zone exploration extremely expensive and difficult. And because there's not really a major financial incentive to explore the Twilight Zone, research is definitely a bit slow. But not only is the Twilight Zone extremely harsh to get to and be in, but it's also extremely vast, making exploring and documenting it nearly impossible fully. And because the Twilight Zone is so massive, it's actually speculated that there may be more fish in the Twilight Zone alone than all other fish on the entire Earth combined. And while this is kind of a fruitless thought experiment, at this point, it's also extremely possible. But not only is it possible, it's a scary thought, because the fish that live in the Twilight Zone are completely weird looking, and probably the closest thing we have to aliens at this time. Like, these fish are literally creating their own light, which is kind of dope. I don't know, I think bioluminescence is just cool to begin with, but I also like to think that fish just got so fed up of being in the dark that they literally created their own organic light. But it's not just seeing cool fish that light up that makes the Twilight Zone interesting. It's also the impact that the Twilight Zone has on the Earth's climate, because the Twilight Zone is a massive ecosystem. And ocean and marine ecosystems specifically play a major role when it comes to carbon storage, which obviously has a direct impact on the Earth's climate, which definitely gives merit to wanting to explore the Twilight Zone more. But yeah, that's kind of all there is to say about it. The Twilight Zone is one of the most common ecosystems in all of the world, technically speaking, although it's one of the ecosystems we know the least about. And maybe that's for the better. Ball lightning. Admittedly, ball lightning isn't all that common, but lightning is relatively common. And I think most of us have heard about ball lightning, and honestly, I just thought it was cool and wanted to discuss this interesting phenomenon. Ball lightning sightings have gone back all the way to the 1600s and continue to be reported today. It's interesting because even today in 2025, we don't know a ton about ball lightning. So I can only imagine what they thought about ball lightning in the 1600s. Ironically, we do know what they thought about ball lightning in the 1800s, as there was a few recorded accounts of experiences with ball lightning, and they basically just described ball lightning as smelling like sulfur and being the work of the devil, which I think is fitting for the time period. In case you're unfamiliar, ball lightning is typically described by witnesses as a glowing, floating sphere of light, and like regular lightning, typically only appears during thunderstorms. Some people people have stated that these balls are only as small as a marble, while others have said that they've been multiple feet long and wide. And the colors that the ball lightning has been reported in is almost as vast as the size, with some people claiming that it was white, yellow, orange, or even blue. But in case ball lightning wasn't unpredictable enough, the way it behaves is also completely unpredictable. Ball lightning can last anywhere from a split second to multiple minutes long. And during the duration of its stay, it typically moves slowly through the air and can even pass through windows or walls, typically causing no damage whatsoever. And in some cases, ball lightning simply vanishes silently. And in other cases, it literally explodes with a loud bang. And already, ball lightning seems like one of the most amazing and also terrifying things you could witness in person. And I can only imagine what witnessing it would be like if you didn't know what ball lightning was. There's actually a video of a Belarusian train station that shows a ball of lightning crossing over all of the train tracks, and it's just amazing to see. And in the comments of this video, there's a ton of people talking about their experience with ball lightning and how the first time they saw it, they thought it was an angel or a ghost or something else that was typically supernatural, which I don't blame them for. If I just saw this thing in front of me in person, I would literally believe I was losing my mind or something really bad was happening. Like, I would not be in awe, I would be in terror. But that's just me. If I don't know about something, I typically lean towards being scared about it. But no matter how cool or interesting or terrifying ball lightning may seem, it's more mysterious than anything else. Obviously, scientists don't have a concrete answer on what ball lightning is or what even causes it. But there are a few interesting theories I'd like to share with you. A couple popular theories that try to explain why ball lightning happens include plasma, burning particles in the air, and even electromagnetic fields. And honestly, they're all kind of vague explanations and potentially could be partially true, but like I mentioned, we just don't know. And one of the biggest reasons why we don't know is because of how rare ball lightning is. It's almost impossible to replicate in a controlled environment, meaning that we're at the mercy of nature providing it to us to study it. And as you can imagine, ball lightning doesn't roll into a lot of labs all that often. And well-equipped scientists typically don't run into ball lightning all that often either, leaving a lot of the thought around ball lightning to be up to speculation and based off of reviewing videos posted online. And if you've made it this far in the video, let me know. If you saw ball lightning out in the wild, would you be terrified or would you be intrigued? I think the honest answer is both. And I guess while we're being honest, let me ask you, do you like watching Trust Me Bro videos? Because if you do, feel free to subscribe. We make videos every single week. Now, let's get on to the last section. Slime mold. Slime mold, or scientifically known as Physarum polycephalum, is not mold, nor slime, nor fungi. It's actually known as a protist. And what makes it unique is that it's actually a single-celled organism. That's right, this jelly-looking, goo-looking thing is actually one organism, although it is full of nuclei. That's right, it might be a single cell, but this one cell has so many nuclei within it. And all of these nuclei actually will come in handy later. Now you might be asking, what's the significance of this yellowy, greeny goo? And is it even common? I've never seen that. And let me answer both of those questions. First of all, is it common? Yeah. If you've gone on a walk in a forest after a rainy day, you have definitely walked past some sort of slime mold. And to answer your first hypothetical question, why does it matter? Well, slime molds are extremely intelligent. So intelligent, in fact, that we don't know how they're so smart or why they're so smart. And that is both interesting and terrifying. How smart is slime mold, you may ask? Well, slime molds have been shown time in and time out to solve mazes consistently. And how they do this is by basically filling up the entire maze with their gooey body. And once they find the exit of the maze, or in the case of the research test, finding the food, they will then retract everything else that isn't directly connecting the start of the slime mold to the food, allowing them to essentially reverse engineer the maze. And these mazes aren't simple either. Some studies have actually been able to have slime molds recreate major transportation networks, like the Tokyo subway system, for example. But not only can slime mold navigate to find food, they've also shown to have some sort of memory by anticipating reoccurring events. And how this is shown is by having them readjust their behavior based off of previous events that have happened in previous studies, proving that these single-celled organisms have some sort of memory even though they have not one neuron. That's right, slime molds have no brain, no nervous system, no complex organs, but they still seemingly can solve problems, make decisions, and even remember past events. And I'll be the first to say it, I'm impressed with this little ball of goo. And this little ball of goo might even be smarter than you. But if you think the ball of goo is not smaller than you, then for who the ball of goo is not smaller than you too? Okay, it is currently 1:53 a.m. and I thought that was funny. I didn't even think that was funny, I just said it. Regardless, the ways in which slime molds achieves any sort of intelligence to scientists is completely unclear. Although, like some of the other entries on this list, the scientists have their theories. And what's currently believed is that the network-like structure of neurons within the slime mold allows the slime mold to process information through chemical signals. essentially allowing it to have a brain without having a brain. And this method of thinking, or I guess thoughtlessness, on the slime mold's part has actually inspired scientists in specific fields like robotics and computing to try to use slime molds to find clues on how to build more efficient self-organizing systems, seeing as the slime mold's pretty good at doing that. And while there's not much more known about the slime mold's intelligence at this time, the fact that this single-celled organism can seemingly think without a brain has definitely inspired engineers and scientists alike. But for now, the mind of this little ball of goo is an enigma. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's really all the time we have for today in this episode, but I'll make a deal with you now. If you guys enjoyed this video and want a part 2, I'd be more than happy to make it. And I actually have a lot of honorable mentions I want to discuss. For example, what happened to the planet Venus? Why do we dream? What happens after we die? How was the universe created? What is dark matter, and why does it make up 95% of the universe? And how long does it take to go get milk? The craziest scams in every time period. The Stone Age. Admittedly, this section is going to be rather short, for a couple of reasons. Primarily being that the Stone Age is literally prehistoric, meaning that everything I'm about to discuss is essentially speculative. Also, because most of human life in the Stone Age was extremely simple, meaning that at this point, human life wasn't even able to comprehend the possibility of deception. If you had something that another human wanted, there was two options. Either they kill you to get the thing, or they die trying to kill you to get that thing. That was realistically the extent of scams in the Stone Age. Keep in mind, the Stone Age literally extends over 3.4 million years worth of history. The Stone Age contains 99.3% of all recorded human history, dating back around 300,000 years ago when Homo sapiens first appeared. So with that being said, what are some scams that could have possibly existed in the Stone Age? And let me present you a few interesting opportunities. Scam number 1, the made you look scam. Here's how the scam goes. You are a caveman, and your enemy, also a caveman, comes to ask you a question. You decide you've had enough of his antics and point in the direction that's behind him. This caveman turns around, you pull out your trusty club and hit him in the head. Now, your enemy is dead, and you have just successfully committed a Stone Age scam. In modern terms, that's not much of a scam at all. But when it comes to prehistoric humans, things were simple. Just think about that one episode of SpongeBob that took place in the prehistoric times. That's kind of what we're working with here. But besides the petty theft and petty murder of the Stone Age, I believe one of the biggest scams out of the Stone Age was actually the existence of the Stone Age itself. You see, the Stone Age primarily is defined by its use of stone tools, specifically near the very end of the Stone Age. And this is because humans using stone tools signifies the evolution of human creativity, human engineering, human development. Now, you may be thinking, well, of course, we need this human development. This isn't a scam at all. This is beautiful. This is progress. And what I would say to you is, not really. Because look where it's gotten us. As humans, we used to sleep outside under the stars, do whatever we wanted all day, go to the bathroom anywhere. We essentially lived like animals, and it was great. Just look how good your dog or cat has it right now. We used to live like them, but now we wake up to an alarm, we go to a job, we commute, we have anxiety, we have bills. Our bills even have bills at this point. So although this scam may have not taken place in the Stone Age, it definitely started in the Stone Age. And potentially one of the biggest scams of the Stone Age was that one meddling, weaselly little caveman that decided to combine a stick with a rock. And maybe if he was the one who got clubbed, we would still be living that sweet animalistic lifestyle. This first section was a bit silly, but I didn't want to leave this Stone Age out of a video about every time period. But with that being said, as we now transition into recorded history, the scams are going to be historically documented and much more serious. But this is a Trust Me Bro video, so don't expect a documentary. The Bronze Age. No, not LeBron James. The Bronze Age. Not LeBron's Age. The Bronze Age. Yes, that was corny, and yes, we're keeping it in. We are now in the Bronze Age, the beginning of recorded scams. And the scam I'm going to be speaking about from the Bronze Age involves metal fraud, and also includes the earliest ever recorded customer complaint. Let me explain. The year is circa 1750 BC, right near the end of the Bronze Age. And there is a famous copper merchant named Ea Nasser. Ea Nasser, unsurprisingly, would buy and sell metals, specifically copper. And this merchant was no stranger to customer complaints, with one of the most famous examples coming from a customer named Nani. Nani's specific issue with Ea Nasser was that Ea Nasser was selling bad quality or low quality copper, and that was a big issue for Nani. Unlike the Stone Age, I'm not just making this up. This transaction and subsequent complaint is recorded in commercial tablets. These tablets were actually unearthed with a group of other tablets recording transactions and complaints about the copper quality. And these were all found in a home that was believed to at one point been owned by Nasser, which is by itself just a really cool piece of history. Nasser was a well-known copper merchant in his city and was even a member of an established and, relatively speaking, respected copper guild, meaning that he wasn't just any Joe Schmo. However, these credentials definitely didn't help him with his business dealings, because although he may have been surrounded by proper, integral copper merchants, Nasser was likely nothing of the sort. And this is proven by the famous tablet sent to Nasser from Nani, which has actually been translated, and I'm about to read exactly what Nani said to Nasser, and I'll let you decide whether or not Nasser was a scammer. The tablet reads as follows. When you came, you said to me as follows. I will give Gimosin fine quality copper ingots. You left, but then you did not do what you promised. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. Who do you take me for, that you treat someone like me with such contempt? I have sent as messengers gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back empty-handed several times. And that through enemy territory. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Dilmun who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. On account of that one trifling mina of silver which I owe you, you feel free to speak in such a way. While I have given to the palace on your behalf 1,080 pounds of copper, and Shubi Abum has likewise given 1,080 pounds of copper, apart from what we had both had written on a sealed tablet to be kept in the temple of Shamash. How have you treated me for that copper? You have withheld my money bag from me in enemy territory. It is now up to you to restore my money to me in full. Take cognizance that from now on I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall from now on select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection because you have treated me with contempt. That was long, but I wanted to give you the exact full quote because I think it's extremely interesting, and I think that Nani's being rather patient and has more than enough reason to be upset. To summarize, Nasser, at least to Nani, is selling low-quality copper, and not only is he selling a low-quality product, but he's promising a high-quality product, and when questioned by the servants that are going to pick up the product, he is not nice at all. He's very combative within these transactions, and not only that, he's also refusing to give a full or even partial refund to Nani after he's complained, and Nani has sent multiple messengers to collect a refund. And what does Nasser do? Turns him away empty-handed and sends him through enemy territory to risk the life of the messenger just to add insult to injury for Nani. I don't know about you, but if I was Nani, I would definitely be sending somebody else to Nasser's door that wasn't a messenger looking for my money back. But even after all of this, Nani isn't even refusing to deal with Nasser anymore. He's just saying that once he gets the copper from Nasser, he's going to go through and verify the quality himself before he buys it, which is something he likely should have been doing, but I guess didn't feel like he had to be doing because he was buying from a merchant in the Copper Guild. But lesson learned on Nani's part, check your metal as you buy it. So yeah, this one tablet that was found thousands of years after it was created went on to solidify Nasser as one of the most notorious Bronze Age businessmen and scammers. Iron Age. The Iron Age is a very interesting time period, and it represents a change of power, at least in the world of metals, as the Iron Age literally represents iron becoming the prominent metal that is being mined, forged, and fashioned into tools and ornaments and armor. And the reason that transition was made is kind of a long story, but the transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age was harsh, and humanity as a whole took a step backwards before it could take 2 steps forwards as it transitioned from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. However, the Iron Age is not free from scams, and it itself has a very interesting laundry list of scams that took place, with the one that I'm going to focus on involving silver coinage, debasement, and hyperinflation. Admittedly, the scam I'm about to discuss kind of bleeds out of the Iron Age, but I had other scams I wanted to associate with other time periods, so although this specific scam doesn't take place in the Iron Age, it definitely has its roots in the Iron Age. So I'm going to allow that technicality to make this work, because trust me, we do have some crazy scams coming up. The Iron Age is when we truly see the rise of coinage being used. During the mid to late Iron Age, we see coins being minted and being transacted with, which during this time in history, circa 600 BC, is a relatively new methodology of transacting, because up until this point, all of commerce was conducted through trade, one good for another. There was no store of value. It was simply merchandise for merchandise, no currency of any sort, at least in the form of coinage. Prior to coinage, precious metals were definitely the currency of choice, but they weren't necessarily currency, just something of value to most people, and a good way to store value efficiently, as they were non-perishable and value dense for the most part. Now, even during this time in the late Iron Age, these coins that were being made weren't even used for transacting yet. They were primarily religious objects, typically used as badges or medals. But it didn't take too long for these people that were creating these interesting, valuable medals to create something that had trade value. Specifically with ancient Greek coinage being minted by the Ionian Greeks in the late 6th century, right at the ass crack of the Iron Age. And it is believed that these ancient Greek coins were the first coins ever to be used for transacting on a large-scale basis, and they were made primarily of small silver fractions. But this recent innovation of commerce spread like wildfire through the 5th and 6th century BC, and quickly became the standard, primarily being pioneered by the ancient Greeks and other empires of the time. But this in itself isn't the scam, it's simply the context for the scam that we are about to discuss. This context is important because it anchors us to the Iron Age, although what we're about to discuss happens slightly after the Iron Age, and involves actually the Roman Empire. During the Iron Age, ancient Rome is established, and during the end of the Iron Age, the Roman Republic is established. And during these times, the innovation with iron is giving Rome a lot of strength and a lot of military capability. And due to the rise of ancient Rome and then the Roman Republic, we find ourselves with the Roman Empire, which, like I mentioned, isn't in the Iron Age, but we're making it count. And it's with the Roman Empire that we find ourselves with our very next scam. The scam being coin debasement. And this one scam actually ended up being a contributing factor to the fall of the Roman Empire. By the time that the Roman Empire was established, coinage was in full effect and used effectively and worked as follows. Early coinage would be made out of pure or near pure materials, typically gold, silver, and copper. These ingots would be purchased, minted, and then sold into circulation with a face value slightly above their metal value. This allowed the government to make a small profit on every coin that they minted, and also allowed the currency to keep a consistent value, as it had an intrinsic value of the metal it was made out of, while it also had a face value of only slightly above that, which everyone generally accepted. Coins typically varied in value from region to region, meaning that in simple modern terms, if you had a coin that had a face value of $2, but was, made out of $1.50's worth of silver, in your region, you can trade this for $2. But if you go to a different region where they have their own coinage, they're not going to accept your coinage at face value, but they'll take it at intrinsic value, meaning that your $2 coin in this new region is now worth $1.50. And this system actually incentivized local trade, as you are going to get the most bang for your buck. But the scam we are going to discuss is the debasement of coin that happened when the government wanted to inflate the number of coins that they could produce, and they tried to do so rather sneakily. There was two primary methods of debasement when they started to use this practice. When the government would mint these coins, they would either make them slightly lighter than they were supposed to be, meaning that they would mint a coin and then shave parts off of it to reclaim small scraps, or they would simply use a poor quality metal. This would save them money and make the coins that they're minting cheaper, while they would still be selling them for the same face value, giving the government extra funds. But these methods of debasement continued and began to progress and became more and more severe. What the Roman Empire began to do was start devaluing their coins by not making them a little lighter or using a lower quality material, but actually reducing the percentage of precious metals in the coins. Early coinage of the Roman Empire consisted of anywhere from 93 to 97% of the precious metal they were supposed to be. But it didn't take long for the government to reduce this number from 93% in 107 AD to 78.5% in 193 AD, and then to 35% in 254 AD, and then 20% in 257 AD, and then all the way down until 5% silver in 270 AD. The impact of this was obviously massive, as this massive influx of token supply and massive decline in intrinsic value of these tokens created hyperinflation, and runaway hyperinflation actually happened multiple times throughout the Roman Empire. As I mentioned before, most of this debasement would happen to fund military campaigns to try to get more land, more money, more power, and they likely justified this debasement by saying they were going to collect more wealth for the greater empire. Although what really happened was prices would rise, and the value of coins that everybody was collecting, holding, trading with was dropping significantly. And it wasn't unheard of for an army to go on a campaign, get paid their money, only to realize that once they go to spend their money, the big paycheck that they thought they had gotten is now only worth a few days' meals, which obviously put pressure between the government and the army, something that no government wants to have. I think it's important to note that in modern times, the creation of money and steady inflation is something we kind of just accept, and it's part of how our currency operates. However, at this time, each individual coin had an intrinsic value, and that was the backing of its value. And even if you paid for currency in your local region and took it to a different region, even if they did not accept your region's currency, they would still pay you what your precious metal was worth, meaning that your money could never go to nothing. I suppose to put it in a modern day context, imagine if the government just said, hey, actually it's cheaper to make $1 bills than it is to make $5 bills. So all new $1 bills are actually 5. And the government just wrote a 5 on a $1 bill. You can still see that it's a $1 bill, but you and everyone else is supposed to act like it's a $5 bill. That's gonna create some suspiciousness. And even that, admittedly, is a bad analogy because the currency that we use today all has the same intrinsic value of nothing, at least not in its physical form. With early coinage in the Iron Age, there was forgery, debasement, and fraud. But I wanted to cover the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire because I thought it was a great summary of what was brewing in the Iron Age at a major historical scale. And while the Roman Empire did not exist in the Iron Age, ancient Rome did. And I'm making this point abundantly clear to prevent any sort of misinformation. And truthfully, the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire was the best example of coin debasement I could find. So I decided to take a story out of the future and apply it to the Iron Age to make the section the best it could be. So yeah, Rome was formed in the Iron Age, coins were formed in the Iron Age, but likely the most famous example of coin debasement and hyperinflation happened a little after and involved the Roman government literally scamming its people by making the currency cheaper and worse while still maintaining the same face value. And well, it backfired on everybody. The Classical Era. Although we are now in the Classical Era, the scam that we're about to discuss is anything but classy and actually contains what is believed to be the first instance of insurance fraud, which is just great to hear that people have been committing insurance fraud for thousands of years. Perhaps insurance fraud is just in our DNA. In the Classical Era, there was a man in ancient Greece known as Hegestratos, and he was a little bit of a knucklehead. During roughly 5th century BCE, near the beginning of the Classical Era, maritime trade was booming. Hegestratos was a ship owner and was profiting from this maritime trade that was taken off. And because he had a big and beautiful and shiny ship, he decided that it would be wise to get insurance, which he did. And this insurance not only covered his cargo, but also his ship on any given sea voyage. How it would work is lenders would lend money to these seafarers using the ship and its loot as collateral. The lender would say, hey, your boat is worth 2 gold ingots and everything in it is worth 5 gold ingots. Great, I'll give you 7 gold ingots. If you come back from your journey of trade with 10 ingots worth of stuff, that's great. Give me 9 ingots. That means I make a 2 ingot profit and you make a 1 ingot profit. But if your ship sinks while you're on this voyage, you don't have to give me anything. That's essentially how the insurance existed, and this helped mitigate the risk for the seafarer and also gave these lenders the opportunity to make money with some risk, but obviously nobody was going to be incentivized to sink their own ship or not come back with loot. The whole point of the voyage was to make money, right? That's where Hegestratos comes in. Hegestratos realized that he didn't actually need to go on any adventures at all, and he didn't even need to fill up his boat with loot. What Hegestratos ended up deciding to do was he would fill his ship with things that looked valuable, and what he would typically do was fill crates with sand, cheap ornaments, with sometimes boxes of valuables on top to make it appear that the whole ship was full of valuables, when in reality there was a layer of valuables on top of a lot of boxes of basically garbage. This would make the ship appear heavy and full and also give creditors a good reason to give him a good insurance policy. Already, Hegestratos was scamming because creditors would give Hegestratos an inflated value, essentially. If Hegestratos was able to convince creditors that his boat was worth at least 2 gold ingots and the contents of his boat were extremely expensive dyes and spices and metals, maybe they would say that the contents of his boat were worth 10 gold ingots, when in reality it was only worth 2 gold ingots when the rest was dirt and sand. That is obviously a scam. But now, sure, Hegestratos has a bunch of gold ingots, but he also has debt, and he's not going to go sail away and make money off of dirt. So what does he do instead? Well, he would go take this boat and deliberately sink it. Now, all of the money that the creditor had given him was his money, fair and straight, and he really was out nothing, and he could continue this plan over and over. And it wasn't long before Hegestratos' scam was exposed, and this kind of shocked the ancient Greek world, because during this time, there was integrity and respect for the law and understanding when it came to commerce. And such a fraud was not even necessarily thought of. But when this scam was exposed, it kind of exposed the vulnerability in these early financial contracts and how people could manipulate things in a way that may seem counterintuitive, but would ultimately be beneficial for the scammer. The case of Hegestratos is considered to be one of the biggest scams of the classical era, not only because it was just so ballsy, but also because it was the first instance of insurance scam and kind of gave the entire insurance industry a huge shakeup and a wake-up call for how they had to protect themselves moving forward when they were crediting people who could potentially screw them over. So yeah, the classical era, I'm sure, had more scams than you could count, but I definitely think the case of Hegestratos is one of the most interesting and definitely one of the most defining of this time period, the medieval era. I don't know about you, but I feel like the medieval era is definitely one of the most interesting parts of history. You have castles, knights, kingdoms, wealth inequality, and a plethora of scams. What is there not to enjoy? It was honestly a bit tough to pick just one scam for the medieval era, but I'm happy with the one I chose, so let's get right into it. There's no doubt that in medieval times, the Christian religion was everything. And this is kind of proven by all of the art, architecture, writings, everything was the Christian religion. And with every fan base comes collectors. And while the Christian religion didn't necessarily have marketable plushies at the time, they definitely had a huge underground market for relics. And these relics were definitely odd, to say the least. Potentially the most famous Christian relic would be the Holy Grail, but it's definitely not the only relic that people were interested in getting their hands on, with some of the most popular and sought after ancient relics being the literal bones of saints. Like, let's say there was a famous saint who was very prolific and known in the church. Well, once they die, if you could get one of their bones, you could possess their magical powers. Like, literally, that was the mindset. Merchants and other saints and even individuals wanted these bones for a plethora of different reasons. Wealthy individuals would typically want to collect these relics to help make their own desires and dreams come true, as these Christian relics were believed to essentially cause miracles. And in that instance, if there was an object that could bless you, that could make all of your dreams come true, that could protect your family and defeat your enemies, is there really a price you wouldn't pay for them? But here's the thing. Not many people had this money at all. And what people resorted to was visiting churches that had these relics so that they could gain the power and benefit of them from a fraction of the price. And that's exactly why bishops and priests would collect these relics. Obviously, they would see the value of these blessed items that could provide miracles as something that they would want to have in their life and in their church, but they also noticed that any church with a relic was gaining more foot traffic, more donations, and became more or less of a landmark and a hotspot for pilgrimages. And this is where the business opportunity arose. Merchants, whether they believed in the power of these relics or not, if a merchant was able to get their hands on a relic at a decent price, they could sell it to almost anybody with money for an astonishing profit. Here's the issue. As the popularity and demand grew for relics, the supply didn't really. Which was great for investors because, supply and demand, but that also gave incentive for others. The only way that a relic could really even be brought into this underground market was by a crusader who would go and reclaim the relic from the Holy Land, or a merchant who would do business in the Holy Land, hopefully trying to get a relic or something close to a relic that they could buy cheap and sell for a massive profit back in Europe. But these two methods were slow and could not keep up with demand whatsoever, which is why some interesting individuals decided to help contribute to that supply chain issue. Here's the deal. Obviously, these relics have absolutely no certificate of authenticity or receipt or any sort of tracking on where they came from. It's essentially just word of mouth. So if you were a respected or authoritative or even just a charismatic figure, you could kind of pass off anything as a relic with enough convincing. And that's exactly the scam that we are going to discuss. Fake black market Christian relics. Some famous examples of this would be fake bones. For example, St. John the Baptist was a famous saint that people claimed to have relics of, and these relics were his bones. But once all of the bones that were claimed to be his were accounted for and organized, it was concluded that either St. John had 3 heads and 5 arms, or some people had some fake relics. 2 other famous and common fake relics were pieces of the Holy Shroud and splinters from the cross that Jesus was crucified on. Obviously, any part of either of these items would have extreme significance to history, and even the tiniest morsel of either of these items would be massively valuable. And for that reason, people decided to make their own. At the time, the only way that these relics could be verified is if they actually had provable miracle abilities. So if a church had a relic in it, and somebody with a disability was healed, or a sick person was made healthy again, or a dying person was living longer, or a poor man came into money, if any of these happened after somebody encountered the relic would have been proved real. And the people who had experienced miracles from these relics would go and tell their friends and their family, essentially marketing the church that had this relic in-house. But even with that being said, who's to say if these people had experienced miracles from genuine or non-genuine items? It really kind of gets messy from there. Once the industry of fake relics began to become exposed, it was almost a running joke at the time that if they bought all of the splinters being sold from the cross, they would actually be able to build a warship out of all of the wood. If anybody tries to sell you a piece of wood telling you that it came from the cross that Jesus was crucified on, I would probably pass, or at least confirm it can do miracles before you buy it. The Renaissance era. If you've watched any of my time period videos, you would know that I've actually never covered the Renaissance era by itself, mostly because the time period itself is short and kind of similar to the era that took place before it. One of the most famous figures to come out of the Renaissance era was Michelangelo, likely most famous for his statue of David. But did you know that he got his start by scamming? Circa 1496, Michelangelo sculpted a marble sleeping Cupid. It was an extremely lifelike and beautiful sculpture that highlighted exactly how talented Michelangelo was even at an early age. But during the Renaissance era, art collectors weren't necessarily looking for modern art. They were looking for historic pieces, which typically meant ancient Roman or Greek statues, rather than new ones. So what Michelangelo did with this statue of the Cupid was he decided, instead of selling it for a cheaper price compared to the antiques, he decided to make his new statue an antique by intentionally wearing it down. It's not quite confirmed how he did it, but he made sure to make this sculpture look worn. And it obviously worked because he was actually able to sell it as a lost Roman antiquity. And not only was he able to sell it, but he sold it for a much higher price than he was initially looking for. This sculpture was actually sold to a cardinal, Raphael Riario, who initially was fooled, but eventually discovered the truth. When Cardinal Raphael discovered the truth and confronted Michelangelo, he wasn't upset with him, he was actually impressed, and he invited Michelangelo to Rome. And when Michelangelo came to Rome, he was given his first major opportunity in his career, and this was the actual opportunity that launched Michelangelo's career and made him the icon that he is today. This cardinal was able to understand the genius of the young Michelangelo, and was likely thinking that if he could point him in the right direction, he could create one of the best artists of all time. So yeah, as far as Renaissance scams are concerned, I think Michelangelo selling one of his original artworks as an antiquity summarizes this era perfectly. And it's kind of ironic to think that Michelangelo literally had to make his art something else to try and sell it. Regardless, Michelangelo was dope, but when he was starting out, he was definitely clever when it came to selling his art. The early modern era. We've covered a lot of scams in this video so far, but one scam we haven't covered is the fake king scam. Obviously, because you can't fake being a king, right? There's no way you can just tell people that, hey, actually, I'm the king. Not only are people not going to believe you, but you're likely going to be killed. And that's the truth unless your name was Perkin Warbeck, who in the 1490s not only claimed to be a king, but also became a serious threat for the reigning king at the time. And he gained significant backing and support. But before we get to how this entire scam ends, let me tell you how it starts. Perkin Warbeck claimed to be the younger of the two princes in the tower, which, if you're unfamiliar, the princes in the tower refers to a mysterious disappearance of two young royals. King Edward V of England and his younger brother, Prince Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York. They were both heirs to the throne of King Edward IV of England, but at the ages of 12 and 9, they were locked away in the Tower of London by their uncle, and they were never seen again. This obviously caused a lot of issues within the kingdom, but for Perkin Warbeck, this created an opportunity. Before pretending to be a king, Warbeck was born into a rich merchant-class family and traveled around and spent time in Ireland selling silks before him and his friend came up with the plan to impersonate the younger of the two brothers who disappeared. As this missing person was not only not found, but was an heir to a throne, meaning that if this person was found, they had legitimate claim to the kingdom, which is definitely a title worth fighting for. Warbeck didn't just necessarily hit the streets telling everybody, hey, by the way, I'm the prince and I'm back and I'm totally good. He was very strategic in who he decided to lay his claim to, which was high-ranking government officials. He gained his first piece of notable support from King Charles VIII of France. And this is a major piece of backing to have behind you, because if the king of another country recognizes and supports you as the lost heir to a throne, you have some serious credibility to your claim. But this didn't last long. As King Henry VII, the current king, had formed an alliance with the King of France, there was no longer support from the King of France to be helping Perkin Warbeck. So we kind of had to start from scratch once again. So the next place that Perkin Warbeck went for support is actually insane, because he went to the actual sister of the lost princes in the tower, and not only did he go there to claim that he was her long-lost brother, but she bought it up. She was like, oh yeah, you are totally my long-lost brother. And now this support was likely even more valuable than the initial support, because no sibling is going to accept a faker as their long-lost sibling, right? Regardless of their beliefs or intentions, this duchess appeared to believe Perkin Warbeck, and with this support, Perkin continued his conquest to claim that he was the long-lost king. The following year, in 1493, he attended the funeral of Maximilian's father, Frederick III, where he was actually recognized as King Richard IV of England at the funeral. And it only took 2 more years in 1495 for support for Warbeck to have the throne bubbling within England. Warbeck was actually able to gather an army of 150 people and attempted a landing in Kent, where Warbeck and his small army were met with locals who were loyal to their actual king, Henry VII, and the Battle of Deal ensued. Most of this army died, and Warbeck retreated back to Ireland. But even in Ireland, he was facing issues and once again fled to Scotland. While in Scotland, Perkin was actually able to set up an arranged marriage with one of the relatives of the king, known as Lady Catherine Gordon. And now, after officially becoming royalty in some regard, the Scottish palace was open to Warbeck to gather his army and begin to plan another attack on England. The attack that Perkin Warbeck and the Scottish king had planned ended up failing before it even started. And what I mean by that is, before the battle even started, they essentially retreated. But the following year, the Scottish king and Warbeck tried again, but this time their landing was different. In 1497, support for the current king of England was low, primarily to new taxes and rising legislation. And for this reason, and because more time had passed for people to sympathize with Perkin, who was pretending to be the lost king, there was slightly more popularity for him on English soil. So this landing was met with some support. He actually was able to raise a rebellion and was declared King Richard IV, the person he was claiming to be this entire time. And at this point, it may have seemed that his plan was successful, and his next plan of attack was to siege the city, where King Henry VII was currently residing. And this siege failed, and once again, his men died, and Perkin Warbeck had to go into hiding once again. And he was able to flee successfully. Well, at least successfully, because he escaped the battle alive, but not fully successfully, because the place that he ended up residing applied a lot of pressure to Perkin. So much pressure so that he actually ended up surrendering himself to the English government, because he was promised a pardon if he surrendered instead of causing any more battles. In 1497, while being tried in front of the real king himself, Perkin Warbeck finally came clean about his elaborate scam and fake life. He told the king that he was not the prince in the tower, and he was not royalty whatsoever. He straight up admitted to being a pretender, because he was promised immunity for telling the truth. But obviously that wasn't the case. After this admission, he was kept close to the king and essentially imprisoned. And a year later, he actually tried to escape England, where he was caught and brought back, and at that point he was put ironically in the Tower of London, where the initial 2 lost princes were lost from. And it was in here where Perkin Warbeck tried to plan another escape and another overthrowing of the government. Essentially, that plan was uncovered, and Perkin Warbeck was executed in 1499. This was a bit of a longer segment, but I wanted to go into detail because this story is literally insane. In a 9-year span, Perkin Warbeck is going from a rich kid who's just living in Ireland selling silk to, from the suggestion of a friend, dedicating the next 9 years of his life essentially on a conquest to claim that he is the long-lost heir to the throne and trying to overthrow the English king, in which he almost does successfully and ends up admitting everything and then dying because of it. If that's not a scam, I don't know what is. The modern era. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no shortage of scams in the modern day, and I'm sure anybody watching this video right now could name at least 5 to 10 scams just off the top of their head. And that's primarily because of access of information. And at least today, scams are exposed quicker than they would have been at any point in history before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're exposed quickly enough. The craziest internet trends people actually did. We've all been there. It's late at night, you're on your phone, and you're scrolling and scrolling until you see a video on your feed that just boggles your mind. It's a video of a person doing the dumbest thing you can imagine. Then you quickly scroll away feeling truly embarrassed for that individual. But as you continue to scroll, you realize that that individual wasn't the only person doing that dumb thing. And as you continue to scroll and scroll, you notice that more and more people are seemingly all doing this incredibly stupid task. You have just stumbled upon a dumb internet trend. Whether it was on TikTok or YouTube or Facebook, the moral of the story is the same. Someone does something really dumb, it gets a lot of likes and views because people are laughing at you, not with you, and people who are hungry for views and attention begin to do the exact same thing in hopes that they could also reach internet fame. I'm not gonna act like I'm a saint here. I remember being a kid and doing the Harlem Shake, hoping to go viral and be a part of cool Harlem Shake compilations. But today's video is not about the Harlem Shake. It is about internet trends that were very obviously dangerous and in some cases even deadly. Oh, and as always, this video is only going to get crazier as the list goes on. Let's begin. The Outlet Challenge. Admittedly, this is going to be the most tame thing I talk about in this entire video, which is crazy because this first entry is literally wild. I don't know about you, but I was definitely a curious kid. And one of the things I was quite curious about is what would happen if I stuck something in the electrical outlet. Fortunately, I never acted on this curiosity. However, I know a lot of people watching this video likely did. With that being said, I do think there is a bit of a difference between doing it accidentally or not knowing what's going to happen and doing it intentionally knowing exactly what's going to happen. Which brings me to the Outlet Challenge. Starting in the early 2020s, videos started circulating on TikTok specifically of people performing a prank where they would plug their phone charger into a wall, tight enough so it would hold, but loose enough so there was a gap, and then they would drop a penny into that gap to see what would happen. The outcome of the seemingly simple machine was, well, a homemade bomb. And that's not an exaggeration. Nearly every video of people performing this challenge or trend resulted in a massive flash, typically resulting in an explosion and in some cases a fire. I wasn't able to track down the exact first instance of this challenge or trend taking place, but simply by searching Outlet Challenge, you can see that this trend was making waves specifically among schools in America. If you had nothing better to do, you could literally spend days watching TikToks of people at school plugging in phone chargers, dropping pennies, and causing explosions in the back of class, which unsurprisingly is dumb, but also dangerous. In the most tame examples of people performing this trend, the outcome would only be sparks and electrical shortage. However, in more extreme examples, full-blown electrical fires were started, smoke coming out of outlets, electrical outlets melting, and walls being covered in black tar, and classrooms needing to be evacuated. And I say classrooms specifically because nearly every video I watched about this challenge was once again at school. A place where kids felt like they could just, light off bombs and get away with it, I guess. Beyond the obvious stupidity of this challenge, there's truly not much more to say besides, I suppose, the danger or craziness aspect of it, which really isn't too crazy compared to some of the things we're going to discuss, but there is a very real opportunity for danger when performing this challenge, as a full-blown house fire is an extremely likely outcome if only a few sparks went in the wrong direction. Now, fortunately, that wasn't the case in most instances, but that doesn't mean that numerous students were at least suspended, expelled, or even charged for arson as a result of this completely dumb prank. Honestly, there's not too much more to say about it because it is extremely simple, and it's my opinion that the reason that this trend took off was because it was so easy to perform, and the result was a rather dramatic visual display. However, the ends don't justify the means here, because as I stated, intentionally shorting an electrical supply, specifically in a public place, is not only dangerous, but it's also illegal. And some kids that were dumb enough to try this challenge learned one or both of those lessons the hard way. Oh, and I guess as a little bit of a bonus for this first section, there was also a similar challenge going on around the same time that was known as the Chromebook Challenge. And all that this challenge involved was a school-provided Chromebook and a metal object. And how this challenge would be performed is you take your Chromebook, take your metal object, and put the metal object in the charge port of the Chromebook. And once again, similarly to the Outlet Challenge, the results were dramatic and in some cases outright dangerous. Videos online of people participating in this challenge show devices begin to spark, smoke, or in some cases even catch on fire. And these fires have reportedly melted charge ports, burnt desks, and generally done enough damage to the Chromebook itself and school property to charge students with property destruction, or in some cases, similar to the Outlet Challenge, arson. So yeah, like I said, this is one of the more tame challenges we're going to discuss, but it's no less brain dead. Because sure, making a fireball with a penny may seem cool, and it's definitely funny to see on a TikTok, but the reality of the situation after your 2 seconds of fame on TikTok ends is a much darker reality I hope none of you have experienced. Let's move on. The Door Kicking Challenge. In the first section, we talked about people intentionally doing damage to public property. However, in this section, the door kicking challenge turns it up a notch, because in this very bright internet trend, what people do is intentionally damage private property, which not only comes with stricter repercussions, but also comes with a lot more danger, for reasons we'll get into. If you're watching this video and are a similar age to me, or probably any age, you likely at some point in your life have gone ding-dong ditching, or at least that's what we called it where I'm from. That pre-internet challenge consisted of going to somebody's house, knocking on the door, running away, hiding in a bush somewhere, and waiting for them to come outside for them to see, well, nobody at their door. And if you were extra crazy, you would do it once or twice more as well. And that was basically the extent of ding-dong ditching. Harmless, funny, but as an adult, I see how it is annoying. Although Ring cameras, I think, have more or less destroyed this entire hobby, which might be a good thing. Now, the door kick challenge differs a bit from ding-dong ditching, because in this internet trend, you're not simply knocking on somebody's front door. What you're doing is you're filming yourself donkey kicking someone's front door and running away. The major difference between these two activities, if you couldn't already tell, is that a donkey kick, A, does a lot more damage, B, is a lot more threatening to anybody inside the house, and C, filming yourself doing this only adds to the case going to be built against you once charges are inevitably laid. I honestly have no idea when knocking on the door became not enough and having to literally kick the door became the new standard for ding-dong ditching, but the fact that people not only upped the ante and also filmed themselves, to me, is once again mind-boggling. However, when you're discussing internet or TikTok trends, you're not necessarily discussing the brightest bunch. And while this trend may seem extremely simple, the repercussions are definitely not. Because since this trend had gained popularity in the late 2010s and early 2020s, videos have of course gone viral online, and gullible children who partook in this challenge got in some serious hot water. As of today, several teenagers have already faced criminal charges for participating in this brainless prank. And some of the charges that have been placed on kids trying to be funny or go viral are the following: trespassing, vandalism, and even attempted burglary. Those charges alone are nothing to play with. But on top of the legal repercussions that kids have faced from doing this challenge, you also have to recognize the possible violent repercussions from homeowners. I'm not sure where you're watching this video from in the world, but I know there's at least a handful of you that are watching this that are saying, if this happened at my house, the first thing I'm doing is grabbing my gun. And because this trend was popular in the United States, that was the reality for a lot of homeowners. Now, part of this trend was after you kick the door, you leave. So fortunately, there wasn't many violent altercations taking place. However, if you were taking place in the door kicking challenge and happened to still be in the sightline of somebody who was armed and assuming that you were trying to break into their home, you may be leaving that property with more holes than you entered with. And I'm not saying that's necessarily right or wrong, but I'm saying that that's just a fact. If you go to somebody's property at night, donkey kick their door, in some case literally breaking the lock and opening it, I wouldn't say it's unfair for a homeowner to assume their house is being broken into. Just imagine how terrifying that can be. In my case, I actually can. Before I even knew this challenge was a thing, I literally had been more or less of the victim of this prank. I was at one of my friends' houses. We were having a big event for one of my friend's birthdays. The house was probably full with 20 people, and near the end of the night, we were all sitting in his living room when we heard a massive bang at the front door. It was late at night, this bang was not normal, it wasn't windy out, and we knew something was seriously wrong. Me and all my friends stood up. Instantly, we were terrified, but assumed a position, and the first thing we did was go and check out the front door. Fortunately, the door was locked. We unlock it, we open it, and nobody was there. But we noticed a massive footprint on the front door. My first thought was that somebody tried to kick down the door, failed, and ran off. But my friend who owned the home said that this was likely a kid trying to pull a prank and not to worry about it. And then he pulled up his Ring camera, saw the footage of the kid donkey kicking the door and running away, and well, we had a bit of a laugh about it, but we were all still rather irritated and on edge for the rest of the night. I think I've already given the door kicking challenge too much time as it is, because it is extremely simple and, well, I really don't need to explain how it's dumb and in some cases dangerous. But I will add a bit of a bonus as well, because similar to the door kicking challenge, there was also a similar trend that was going on, I feel like in 2023, 2024, known as the Kool-Aid Man challenge. In this challenge, you would typically run through somebody's fence, usually late at night, usually while drunk, and the sole goal was to break a hole in the fence and then move on with your day. For this trend, I didn't find too many examples of people filming themselves doing it. However, there is so many examples on security footage of people walking typically drunkenly down the sidewalk at night, seeing a fence, and then just deciding to run through it and continue on with their stroll. Unsurprisingly, this challenge, like the door kicking challenge, has also resulted in numerous charges being laid on teens and young adults thinking they're funny and getting a serious reality check. The Tide Pod Challenge. If you hadn't have heard of any of the other trends in this video so far, you've definitely heard of this one. And some of you may be thinking, the Tide Pod Challenge, that wasn't real, that was a joke. People didn't actually do that. And well, you're technically kind of right. The Tide Pod food meme definitely started with a satirical nature. People were posting pictures on Twitter and Reddit and other social medias of food with Tide Pods as a topping. Ironic and innocent enough. However, this joke quickly grew from fantasy to reality. Specifically, when people decided that, sure, a picture of it on a pizza is silly, but what if I actually tried to eat it? And this thought process and the eventual videos that came out of this thought process led to an internet trend that, well, unfortunately swept the nation. The Tide Pod Challenge itself initially started circulating in the late 2010s, unsurprisingly among kids who had seen other viral videos and aspired to make their own viral videos, specifically of eating a Tide Pod. These videos weren't only exclusive to TikTok, they were kind of everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. They were being shared everywhere because of how ridiculous they were, and the whole point of the video was to kind of just film yourself trying to eat a Tide Pod and getting a reaction. Your face of how you were trying to chew it, your face when you actually had the flavor and the, well, detergent in your mouth, and the rather disgusting aftermath of trying to get detergent out of your mouth and hopefully not out of your stomach. Similar to the whole outlet challenge, I feel like this challenge really took off because of how accessible it was to anybody. Like, if you're a kid in your mom's basement and you just happen to be scrolling TikTok and you saw somebody with 1 million likes eating a Tide Pod and spitting it out, well, all you would have to do is to go in the laundry room, get a Tide Pod, film yourself doing it, and boom, you're just as cool as that guy. And it's, in my opinion, because of this ease of access that this entire trend became as big as it eventually did. And while this challenge may seem simple and innocent enough, the outcomes were anything but that. Taking a step backwards, you kind of have to understand that the reason why the Tide Pod Challenge was even viral in the first place was because Tide Pods were so obviously inedible and, well, toxic. Like, there was a reason there was no Apple Challenge because, well, biting into an apple and eating it is, well, normal. But swap that apple for a toxic Tide Pod and now you have some content. Tide Pods themselves may be bright colored, smell good, and look like candy. However, they were the furthest thing from that. And even small amounts of exposure from the chemicals within Tide Pods could lead to chemical burns, seizures, difficulty breathing, and even severe poisoning in extreme cases. It's been reported that between 2016 and 2020, in the United States alone, there was over 35,000 emergency room visits of children under the age of 18 due to the Tide Pod Challenge. And in 12.5% of those 35,000 cases, hospitalization was required. And I feel like that just kind of goes to show the power of scale. Because yeah, sure, it may seem innocent enough to some that, oh, I just bit this inedible thing, I spit it out, I took the video, that's it. But when you have millions of people doing it, even if only 0.1% of people have an extreme unfortunate incident, well, that still leads to thousands upon thousands of people, as we saw, in the hospital because of Tide Pods. The Tide Pod epidemic itself got so bad, in fact, that in 2018, New York State introduced legislation that aimed to ban candy-style detergent pods to prevent further damages to children. I really wish that was a joke, but unfortunately, that's a fact. And it's crazy to believe that legislators literally had to try to come up with an idea on how to prevent children from eating Tide Pods. And I suppose there is an argument to be made about, well, the Tide Pods looking candy-like, I suppose. But the reality is, the challenge and trend itself were undoubtedly the reason that so many vulnerable and gullible children were partaking and, unfortunately, in some cases, hurting themselves. And while we don't know the true extent of how many people in total have tried to consume a Tide Pod, the fact alone that there was 35,000 hospital visits associated with Tide Pods is enough information to know that this challenge was truly detrimental of the bored youth of the late 2010s. The Fire Challenge. If I told you that there was a viral internet trend that consisted of simply setting yourself on fire, would you believe me? Obviously not, right? This is obviously the digital equivalent of saying, hey, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you too? It's a rhetorical question that has an obvious answer. No. But what if I told you that the Fire Challenge was unfortunately a very real and very viral internet trend? And it was exactly as dumb as it sounded. The Fire Challenge is actually one of the older internet trends that we've discussed so far. And the mainstream popularity of this trend kind of emerged in the early 2010s. The videos of people participating in this challenge were simple. Put something flammable on your hand, typically rubbing alcohol or hand sanitizer, light it on fire, look at the cool flames, and then put it out. Obviously dumb, but seemingly simple enough. However, as we've already seen, results and outcomes may vary. In the early 2010s, the challenge started small, people putting a little bit of rubbing alcohol in the palm of their hand to light it, and then put it out. And as these videos gained popularity, people kept raising the ante more and more. Instead of putting rubbing alcohol in the palm of their hand, they would cover their entire hand. Instead of covering their entire hand, they would cover their arm in it. And it even got to the point where people were putting rubbing alcohol on their entire body, lighting themselves on fire for a TikTok, and then attempting to put themselves out, sometimes unsuccessfully. It's my belief once again that this challenge truly took off because of of the reasons we've discussed previously. Similar to the outlet challenge, it was visibly dramatic, and similar to the Tide Pod challenge, it was easily accessible. Any kid who was scrolling on Vine at the time or TikTok in the more modern times could watch somebody set themselves on fire and go, my mom has rubbing alcohol in the bathroom. She has a lighter beside her candle. I can do this right now and go viral. And unfortunately, that's what happened for a lot of kids. I'm sure at least some of you, and maybe even most of you, have seen videos online of people doing this challenge and unfortunately failing miserably, as there is a lot of viral videos of people partaking in this challenge and it just simply didn't go well. Fortunately, in most of these examples, these people at least had a quarter of a brain because they would perform this challenge in the shower. But even in those cases, it wasn't a foolproof plan, because I can remember from memory a video of a guy in a shower covered in rubbing alcohol, setting himself on fire, and before he could even put himself out, he falls, knocks over the alcohol, sets the entire bathroom on fire, and just leaves the bathroom before even turning the shower on. And while you don't see the aftermath of that video, I can only imagine it was detrimental. Most of the viral videos surrounding the fire challenge don't show the outcome, but some of the more unfortunate results include severe burns, infections from those burns, permanent scarring, and in some cases, even death. And reported deaths have happened because of this challenge. One of the more recent examples took place in 2023, when an Arizona teen named Corey Lee suffered burns on more than half of his body as a result of the fire challenge. Corey specifically was trying to do a variation of the fire challenge known as the fireball challenge, where you don't even set yourself on fire, you simply try to create a homemade fireball. I truly don't think I need to go into too much more detail on why it's not smart and obviously dangerous to literally set yourself on fire, but I did want to add more context around the whole fire challenge because, believe it or not, this was a pretty widespread trend, and it also has had resurgences over the last decade. And unfortunately, as we've seen, children are still dying in the 2020s due to the lack of education around these seemingly innocent but unfortunately deadly internet trends. The Milk Crate Challenge. This TikTok epidemic was likely the result of pandemic boredom. In case you've never heard of the Milk Crate Challenge, you don't have to eat a milk crate or you don't have to fit your body into a milk crate. The Milk Crate Challenge basically involves creating a sort of pyramid-based structure out of milk crates and then trying to cross it successfully. The challenge kind of blew up initially in 2021 on TikTok, and these viral videos showed people either successfully crossing super tall milk crate pyramids, or in most cases, getting about halfway up the pyramid only to then lose balance and have the entire milk crate pyramid fall over, and well, the video would end. These viral clips were funny to watch, seeming like just a regular fail video, somebody falling down, haha, whatever. But once again, with a desire for views comes upping the ante, and that's exactly what happened. The Milk Crate Challenge quickly grew bigger and bigger, with people building taller pyramids on more unsteady surfaces. And of course, with this increased danger in height, there was absolutely no increase in safety precautions, unfortunately leading to more virality, further feeding the beast. The Milk Crate Challenge, unlike some of the other challenges we've discussed, is a bit different because it's not necessarily only a feat of bravery, it's also a feat of physical endurance. To some, the Milk Crate Challenge was nearly an Olympic-level display of balance, speed, precision, and ultimately stupidity. Because it's no secret that milk crates are not the most sturdy structure, especially when you stack them 10 tall and stand on them while moving relatively quickly. And of course, the result of this extremely viral and, well, extremely dumb challenge was the following. Between 2020 and 2021 alone, there was over 8,100 emergency room visits as a direct result from this trend. And the most common injury associated with this trend was concussions, broken bones, and even paralysis in extreme cases. While at a first glance, the Milk Crate Challenge kind of just seems like a game show that you can build in your own backyard, you know, basically a mini redneck America's Ninja Warrior, absolutely nobody participating in this challenge got a prize. Unless you consider a concussion a prize, but I personally wouldn't. Interestingly, my whole philosophy of access doesn't necessarily apply here, at least not in my personal experience, because sure, it's easy enough to build a milk crate pyramid, but who has like 20, 30, 40, 50 milk crates? Maybe that's just a Canadian thing because we put our milk in bags, but I personally have never experienced in my childhood or adult life an abundance of milk crates or desire to climb them in an unsafe manner. I feel like to some people it may seem controversial to put the Milk Crate Challenge as more crazy than the Fire Challenge, but the reason why I did this was because the Fire Challenge was at least obviously dumb and you would truly have to be hungry for attention or a brain to try it for yourself. However, the Milk Crate Challenge seemed a bit more innocent, and I would argue that it's for that reason it ultimately resulted in more injuries and death, which is why, in my opinion, it's likely more crazy. But speaking of crazy, it's crazy that nearly 75% of you are watching this video right now and are not subscribed. We just hit 1 million subscribers, we post fire videos every Friday, and we're now on the road to 2 million subscribers. If you like the videos I make, well, be a bro and subscribe. Now let's get to our next challenge. the Blackout Challenge. At this point in the video, you're probably thinking to yourself, if they made a challenge called the Eat Poop and Jump Off the Roof Challenge, people would do it. And you're probably not wrong. However, I did want to show a bit of sympathy for this next challenge because although it is relatively obviously dangerous, it's also one of the more innocent seeming challenges that has led to the unfortunate demise of so many innocent children. The Blackout Challenge, or the choking game, might be the oldest challenge on this entire video and actually predates the entire internet itself. I'm going to be focusing on the Blackout Challenge specifically, although the choking game has a similar goal, similar execution, and similar outcome. The entire point of the Blackout Challenge is to restrict oxygen flow to the brain, specifically to feel a state of euphoria and to also nearly lose consciousness without fully losing it. In the pre-internet times during the choking game, people would typically do this with their friends to experience the feeling of having that restricted oxygen flow to the brain. However, in more recent times, people would do this with their friends and film it to gain popularity online to show the reaction to essentially losing consciousness and literally losing brain cells. How the Blackout Challenge would typically work is one person would essentially take a deep breath in while another person would simultaneously give them a strong bear hug from behind until that person passed out from a lack of oxygen. Typically, as a result of this lack of oxygen, people would fall over and act drunk for a few moments before regaining consciousness. And these videos would go viral specifically among young people because of how crazy the effects were. Now, here's the deal. Some young people watching these videos just thought it was cool to see somebody act so weird and thought it was, almost like a morbid curiosity. However, some young people were very curious to have this experience for themselves, seeing it almost as a way to get high without doing drugs or alcohol. And this is a major dangerous factor in this entire challenge because young people seeing people do this online gave them a false sense of security that, oh, I'll feel funny or dizzy, but I'll be fine right after. And everybody online's doing it, so I can do it. When in reality, it's actually that false sense of confidence that provides so much risk. Not necessarily to one individual particularly, but because, once again, with scale, more people are trying it, there's more opportunities for things to go wrong. And go wrong, they did. You see, believe it or not, oxygen deprivation in the brain is extremely dangerous. And even brief interruptions of oxygen in your brain can cause seizure, long-term brain damage, heart complications, and even death in more ways than one. With the most common cause of death being asphyxiation, however, the second most common cause of death was actually head injury. That's because in some cases, people trying this challenge would lose consciousness and then fall and hit their head, in some cases either causing instant death or an injury that resulted in death not long after, which is just heartbreaking. The whole Blackout Challenge has claimed victims as young as 10 years old, and it's simply all because people saw it online, they thought it was safe, they thought it was a way that they could just feel silly for a few moments, when in reality, it's not that you just feel dizzy and silly, you are literally depriving your most important organ of its most important nutrient. And sure, the videos online may seem silly, but attempting to do this yourself is literally putting your life at risk. However, the target audience of this challenge was, for the most part, unaware of that fact. And the results, as we've discussed and seen, have truly been unfortunate. And that's kind of one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to make this video. A, to discuss some truly ludicrous and just outrageous trends that people have actually done, and also to try to hopefully spread some awareness. If you see people doing something online that seems dangerous or looks dumb, it probably is, and you probably shouldn't do it. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna say, in basically no case should you do something you see people doing online. Not to be grandpa bro, but if we've learned anything from this video, it's that, well, internet challenges are not your friend. And I guess before we get to the last entry of this video, I just want to say, if you guys have enjoyed this video about crazy internet trends, unfortunately, there is many more that I could discuss, and I obviously couldn't fit them all in one video. So if you guys want a part 2 to this video, leave a like below, or just leave a comment saying part 2, and I would be more than happy to make that video for you. But with that being said, let's move on to the last entry of this video, the Kia Challenge. So far in this video, we've discussed challenges that are either destructive to others' property or your personal body. But this final entry on this list is a challenge that does both. The Kia Challenge started on TikTok in roughly 2022, and it was started by a group of teenagers who later became known as the Kia Boys. And the Kia Boys went viral because they were posting videos of themselves seemingly non-stop of them breaking into Kia and Hyundai vehicles using simple tools, starting them in under a minute, and then joyriding them in the most dangerous and dumb ways. I'm assuming most of you have seen or at least heard of the Kia Boys, but if you haven't, well, you're in for a treat. Like I mentioned, in the early 2020s, it was discovered that almost every Kia and Hyundai model had a major flaw. There was no engine immobilizer, meaning that if you had very basic tools and, well, very basic knowledge, you could break into these cars, start them, and you had a brand new car at your disposal. And with how popular Kia and Hyundai models have been in recent years, the Kia Boys and anybody wanting to try the Kia Challenge basically basically had instant access to the focal point of this challenge. Obviously, when these videos started popping up on TikTok around 2022, they were going extremely viral because of how insane they were. Kids were breaking into random Kias, starting them within a minute, joyriding them in the most dangerous of ways, typically speeding, hanging out the side of them, ramming into their vehicles, and then just ditching them and doing it all again. Sometimes numerous times in the same night. Obviously, I don't think I need to go into excruciating detail on why people with no license driving stolen cars at reckless speeds in neighborhoods is dangerous to literally everybody, but well, in case you're missing part of your brain yourself, the biggest dangers associated with this challenge are, of course, danger to roadgoers, danger to pedestrians, danger to the people that are in the cars, whether they be the burglar or people that are simply friends with the burglar that simply thought a joyride could be fun. And on top of the potential loss of life or injury that could be caused out of the stupidity, of course, we have property damage. Obviously, we have the individual that is likely just trying to get by who has just had their car damaged and stolen, but we also have all of the property damage caused by these joyrides that typically hit other vehicles, street signs, power poles, mailboxes, you name it, a Kia Boy, Kia car has hit it. And it seemed like in 2022, there was simply no stopping the Kia Boys, and these videos were viral. Not only videos from the Kia Boys themselves, but also videos of people trying it, news clips of the news covering the Kia Boys, and even interviews with the Kia Boys from different YouTubers. The whole Kia Boys trend and phenomenon became so popular that even TikTok got backlash for even hosting the content of these people doing it. And this trend was simply one of those trends that, while it's crazy to assume that somebody can be inspired to just steal a car by watching a video, because of how viral and prevalent this whole trend and phenomenon was, there was a massive spike of Grand Theft Autos during this time, which led to a plethora of viral videos, a plethora of injuries, a handful of deaths, and ultimately massive reform for automakers to ensure that this would never happen again. I think the overarching theme on this entire video is the fact that, sure, it may be interesting or shocking or even funny to see one of these videos online, somebody eating a Tide Pod or setting themselves on fire or falling off a milk crate. But what I really wanted to highlight in this video is that, sure, the 5 seconds you see may be shocking or funny or crazy, but the reality of that situation is much more dangerous than you could ever assume. Not only because the person you saw in that video might be permanently injured, but also because the video that you saw and thought was funny, somebody else saw and thought was inspiring. And well, their lack of education and misplaced inspiration could have led to serious bodily harm. Ancient mysteries that were finally solved. The collapse of classic Mayan civilization. The ancient Maya civilization has some of the coolest lore when it comes to ancient history, most notably because of their architecture, their mathematics, their astronomical system, and likely most famously, their calendar. In case you've been living under a rock, remember when in 2012 everybody thought the world was just gonna, end? That was because of the Mayan calendar, and that actually wasn't an end of the world prediction, it was actually more or less of a formatting error. Regardless, the Mayan civilization was an extremely advanced civilization that existed for thousands of years. And it's recorded that the Mayan civilization dates back as far as 2000 BC. Obviously, starting from humble beginnings, consisting of simple villages and early agricultural development. It took roughly 1200 years from 2000 BC to 750 BC for the Maya civilization to start seeing significant societal development, specifically with the development of large architectural projects and even writing. These early years in Mayan history are known as the pre-classic era. And I guess there's 3 primary time periods when speaking on Mayan history: pre-classic period, the classic period, and the post-classic period. And the collapse of Mayan civilization we're going to be talking about is specifically the collapse of the classic period, which is the one that was most mysterious and only recently understood fully. From roughly 2000 BC to 250 AD, the Mayan civilization was developed greatly, which leads us to the classical period of the Maya civilization. This classic period of Mayan civilization is typically categorized by construction and urbanism, and on top of the already established development in architecture, agriculture, and scripting, there is now also significant development in intellectual and artistic activities, which are some of the most famous and celebrated parts of Mayan culture still to this day. During this classic period from 250 AD to 900 AD, there was cities with populations as large as 120,000 people, and there was numerous cities spread across all of Maya with established trade networks connecting all of them. But this major development brings us to our first historical mystery. From the ancient times going back as far as 2000 BC to more early modern times in 900 AD, the Mayan civilization saw immense development in almost every aspect of society. They had trade, architecture, agriculture, literature, art. It seemed like the Mayan civilization only had progress. But then something interesting happened. During the 9th century, it seemed like almost out of nowhere, Mayan cities were just collapsing and being abandoned, leaving these prosperous and developed cities to essentially rot for a reason that no archaeologist could understand until now. For the longest time, archaeologists that dedicated their life to understand the Mayans could not pin a single answer to this question. What happened to classic Mayan civilization? There was no one ice age or asteroid or army or anything they could pin on this time time frame to draw a reasonable conclusion to why such a developed and growing civilization would essentially just abandon their homeland. That was until 2012, when it was discovered that there was no one reason for the collapse of classic Maya. It was actually a combination of issues that caused an interconnected crisis, and it took experts from a plethora of different studies to kind of come to this conclusion, including archaeologists, scientists, and satellite imaging experts. But here's the conclusion that they eventually came to. One of the biggest factors that played a major role in these classic Mayan cities being abandoned was essentially a major political collapse. And even that collapse is multifaceted, because even that political instability was caused by a number of factors. So before we just blame everything on political instability, let's kind of look at the landscape of the time. Near the end of the classic Maya civilization, there was a lot going wrong. Specifically, deforestation, overpopulation, and drought, which all ultimately led to a massive lack of food. At this point in time, there was already a multi-decade-long drought going on in the area. Little to no rain, streams drying up, and soil fertility was at an all-time low. Coupling this with environmental stress from the deforestation, paired with also an exponentially growing population at the time, meant that things were only destined to fail. And because of this, the thriving, developed city that was sustaining all of this life and growth was now crumbling beneath its feet because it couldn't sustain all of these people. But on top of people just being too crowded and too hungry, the current system of government almost had no capabilities of solving this issue at all. Specifically because the classic Mayan civilization was based on the ritual authority of the ruler, which means the Mayan ruler was only able to control things like construction, warfare, and ritual. Essentially things that only related to the Mayan tradition. But things like agriculture, food trade, and food distribution were completely out of the ruler's hands, meaning that there was no real system of power in place that could help end these ongoing issues that were at this point exponential. And because of the ongoing drought, the exponential growth of the population, and the lack of agricultural support, people had no other chance than to abandon these cities that they were living in, and most people ended up heading northward, abandoning this classic Mayan civilization that they had spent, at this point, thousands of years building. And while this 2012 conclusion kind of solves the mystery of what happened to classic Maya, the story of the Mayan civilization doesn't end there, because Mayan history didn't die out with classic Maya. There is still a post-classic period that went on, although it's an unfortunate one. This political instability that was experienced in classic Maya kind of echoed through post-classic Maya, and this continued instability didn't allow the Mayan people to settle as quickly and rebuild as they would have in previous times. But the major nail in the coffin, which was no mystery, was what happened at the very end of all Mayan civilization, which happened in the mid-1500s, and can be summarized in two words: Spanish conquests. The post-classic Mayan civilization was simply no match for the germs, steel, and armies that the Spanish had at the time. And while the Mayan civilization obviously no longer exists today, their descendants definitely do. And globally, there's over 6 million people that are still speaking the 28 different Mayan languages. Most of these people living in similar areas to where their ancestors did, which is pretty cool that their culture is able to live on. But yeah, archaeologists were stumped why Mayan civilization seemingly had a random exodus during the 9th century, and it took all the way up until 2012 for the solution to be unveiled: self-healing Roman concrete. At this point, I really don't think I need to explain why the Roman Empire was so impressive. The feats and lore of ancient Rome and the Roman Empire are just so cool. And we've talked about a lot of this history on this channel. Actually, my second video ever on this channel was about why Rome even fell in the first place. But that brings us to our next mystery. As I'm hoping most of you know, Rome fell a very long time ago. Although in the modern day, we still have a lot of architecture from ancient Rome and the Roman Empire. And this has puzzled archaeologists for centuries. And it's a reasonable question. How did the Romans have such effective, long-lasting structures made out of concrete that didn't have rebar, and they didn't have any of the modern math or tools or tricks that we have today with our modern concrete structures? There's a saying that goes, modern times require modern solutions, but I think there should also be a saying, ancient times require ancient solutions. And the ancient solutions that the Romans used for their concrete was genius. And it's definitely not an accident that so many Roman ruins are still in remarkable condition to this very day. In January of 2023, not even 3 years ago, a group of scientists from MIT and Harvard were doing a deep dive into Roman concrete when they finally came to the conclusion of the Romans' concrete success. And it's actually rather interesting. But let's take a step back. Before this discovery in MIT in 2023, all of the building blocks of Roman concrete were known. We knew that the Romans used volcanic rock, volcanic ash, seawater, and a little bit of slacked lime, essentially a limestone water mixture. But here's the caveat. Prior to this discovery in 2023, the going belief was that this slacked lime and limestone was not an actual important component in this concrete construction. It was more or less of a byproduct of poor patchwork and didn't actually belong to make the concrete better. It was just kind of there by mistake or due to low quality materials. But the irony is that this is actually the complete opposite of the truth. This limestone and slack lime in this Roman concrete was the exact reason for its longevity over thousands of years. You see, the limestone wasn't there for looks or because it was cheap to add into concrete. The Romans knew that limestone would react with water in a way that would be beneficial for the concrete's longevity. Essentially, what the Romans would do was they would create a concrete mixture, ensuring that pieces of limestone and slack lime were inside of the concrete made from this volcanic ash and seawater. And as this concrete was being processed and cured, there would essentially be small pockets of slack lime and limestone throughout all of the cement. Just imagine mint chocolate chip ice cream. The concrete is the mint ice cream, and then the chocolate chips are all the little bits of slack lime and limestone. And I apologize for not giving a trigger warning for mint chip ice cream. I know it's a very controversial ice cream, but I'm just gonna say it. I like it. Back to the mystery though, although this limestone didn't necessarily serve a huge purpose when the concrete was fresh and intact, as the concrete would begin to settle and shift and crack over time, this would expose the chunks of slack lime and limestone. And this is exactly where the magic happens. As these bits of slack lime and limestone would be exposed, water would begin to enter these cracks, and the reaction between the limestone and the water would cause a chemical reaction that would essentially begin to self-heal the concrete. And this seemingly rudimentary solution was actually the cornerstone of Roman concrete success, and the solution to a mystery that went on for decades. Strange Peruvian holes. Imagine you're an archaeologist in the early 1900s walking through rural Peru. It's hot, sunny, and you're getting pretty miserable when you notice a strange structure in the ground. It's a spirally, rocky thing, and you have no idea what it is. You take note of it, but keep moving, because it honestly could be anything. When eventually you notice another one, and then another one. You notice at this point so many throughout the day that you just can no longer ignore it, and you make a note of it. You bring it back to your archaeological buddies, but nobody has an answer. Nobody's seen these before, and they're not quite sure what these are or what their purpose was. These strange structures in the deserts of southern Peru likely had a purpose, but what was that purpose? The ancient Nazca people lived here, but were they advanced enough to build anything like this? And if they were building these things, what were they building them for? You ditch your friends and go to the library to try to find any archaeological archives of these structures existing, and there's really nothing you can find. You've been able to read historical accounts confirming that other people have seen these in the past, although any historical data is scarce, and there's absolutely no answer about them, only an acknowledgement of their existence. So at this point, you're stumped. And with this discovery, you set out on a journey for answers, but what you end up starting is a massive conspiracy theory on what these things could be. Decades after you first saw these in the early 1900s, theories are becoming more and more widespread as other archaeologists have began to study the Nazca area of Peru. At this point, it was believed that the Nazca people had pre-Columbian origins in this region, with a culture that likely flourished from 100 BC to 800 AD. But it was also believed that these structures were similar to Spanish mines and subterranean canals. And so by some, it was initially believed that these structures were potentially Spanish, although that theory was soon to be proven very wrong. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, a group of Italian researchers and archaeologists decided to study the Nazca area of Peru using satellite imaging, something that at that point hadn't been done yet for this purpose. And what they found was amazing. What they discovered was that this system of structures was much more extensive than they initially thought, and even saw that these structures were present in nearby settlements, which were dated and identified separately from this discovery. Further investigation showed that there was even structures in the Nazca drainage basin, which ultimately gave a lot more context to what these structures could have been. And it was ultimately concluded that these mysterious seeming structures were a subterranean irrigation system, or simply put, an underground well basically, to transfer water between settlements and areas in this vast desert. And with this discovery, it was ruled that no, the Spanish didn't build these. And while the Spanish could have very easily leveraged them while they were in the area, these specific structures were pre-Hispanic. And in 2017, the general consensus was that these structures were built as far back as 500 AD. And the combination of all of these discoveries definitely made some archaeologists reconsider how advanced they believed the Nazca people to be. The 4,000-year-old comb. In 2016, a group of archaeologists were in the ruins of Lachish, an ancient Canaanite city-state which is located in modern-day Israel. During this dig, they found a very interesting artifact that ended up being a very significant discovery for ancient language. During this dig, one of the archaeologists found an ivory comb. It doesn't really sound super exciting until you understand that this ivory comb was literally 3,700 years old. This ivory comb was made out of elephant ivory, and while this discovery in this artifact is amazing, it doesn't end there. On this small comb, there was a very faint and small sentence written. But what was interesting was, even though this artifact was extremely old, nearly 4,000 years old, the sentence that was written used the phonetic alphabet, which was extremely uncommon for this time. Typically during this time frame, hieroglyphs or other forms of of script were what people used. So finding the phonetic alphabet was very interesting. But while this ancient artifact was cool, the mystery still stood. What did this say? And this mystery was actually relatively short-lived, as after it was found in 2016, the code was deciphered in 2021. And what was engraved on the comb goes as follows: "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." And I guess this was more or less of a blessing of your hair, or maybe a threat against potential lice living in your hair. Regardless, it's so cool that they were actually able to translate what was on this 4,000-year-old artifact. And historians believe that this artifact likely came from Egypt, because the region in which this artifact was found had no elephants anywhere nearby. And it was believed that this artifact was owned by a wealthy trader who was able to get luxury goods from other parts of the world. And who knows, maybe even just getting lice out of your hair during this time period was a luxury. So if I was one of the archaeologists on this dig, assuming that the structural integrity was solid on this comb, I would definitely run it through my hair, just to say I did it. And yes, I have hair. The mystery of the Ryukyu Islands. The Ryukyu Islands are a chain of small, isolated islands in the western Pacific Ocean off the coast of Japan and east of China. In the modern day, these islands are part of the Okinawa prefecture in Japan, but that wasn't always the case. In the history of people on these islands actually go as far back as 35,000 years ago. But this is where the mystery comes into play. When human remains were first discovered on these islands and they were dated all the way back to the Paleolithic period, people were astonished to see any human life on this island. And because of that, the initial theory was that these people must have gotten here by accident, and that there was simply no way that people would intentionally sail so far to these remote islands, hundreds of kilometers away from any other major civilization. But that begs the question, if people never got to this island intentionally and only got here by accident, how did they get here by accident? And it was that exact question that a group of US-based researchers planned to answer. This study went on for a long time too. From 1989 all the way up until 2017, these organizations dropped 138 buoys from the eastern coast of Taiwan, as well as the northern tip of the Philippines. And they picked both of these two locations specifically because they were part of the Kuroshio Current, the world's fastest ocean current that literally almost hasn't changed in the last 100,000 years, so the data should be relatively consistent. And what they found after dropping all of these buoys from both of these locations, out of 138 of these buoys, none of them floated to these islands, and only 4 of them floated within a 20-kilometer radius of any of the islands, basically blowing up the theory that the humans that were on this island got there by accident, and further validated the theory that prehistoric humans set sail intentionally to find these islands and intentionally inhabited them. And it's just interesting because 35,000 years ago, these prehistoric humans were getting on boats and floating to undiscovered islands. And while this doesn't necessarily confirm that this is exactly what happened, researchers that were part of the project did say, quote, "It was more likely that the early seafarers had more carefully plotted their courses than had been assumed," which I think is a nice way of saying we underestimated these fuzzballs. But at least it does shine light on how these people even got to this island in the first place. Ancient perfume. Here's the deal. We live very differently from our ancient ancestors, but we actually kind of share a lot of similar traits and even in some cases luxuries. And one example of that is perfume. Nowadays, you know, it never hurts to put on a little Dior Sauvage, or maybe if you're in middle school, a little Axe body spray to, you know, get the pheromones going. But this seemingly modern activity is actually nothing of the sort. And our ancient ancestors were no stranger to putting on a little stank for the ladies. Or the guys. Let me explain. For a very long time, it was known and understood that our ancient ancestors used perfume. There was writings, there was evidence, they knew that this was a luxury item that the rich enjoyed. But up until a certain point, there was never any evidence of it around. And there was very little hope that we would be able to ever smell ancient perfume. That was until a jar of Roman perfume was found in a Spanish villa, in an ancient burial site where Roman settlers once lived. This perfume that was found was contained in a quartz bottle, which alone was considered to be a luxury item of the time. But it doesn't end there. This quartz bottle was hidden in a dark and dry place, and it was also tightly sealed in a tar-like substance that was later revealed to be bitumen. And because of the nearly perfect conditions that this perfume was kept in, the internal contents were preserved. And this was a massive discovery into what the Romans liked to smell like. Previous to this discovery, it was pretty well known that the Romans would use olive oil and other oils and animal fats as a base of their perfumes and colognes, and obviously that they used colognes and perfumes. But with this discovery, researchers were actually able to smell for the first time ever what Roman perfume would have smelled like. Laboratory analyses of the bottle revealed that the primary scent, at least in this bottle of perfume, was patchouli. And this was kind of an amazing discovery because patchouli is a tropical plant from Southeast Asia and was likely brought to Rome through trade networks. Now, I want to reiterate that the scientists didn't just pop off the cap and smell it and, oh wow, it smells like patchouli, this smells so good. Like, no, like the internal contents were preserved but not necessarily fresh, and it took a chemical analysis to even be able to identify the patchouli's chemical signature in the mush that was in this quartz flask. But it was obviously enough to give us a very interesting insight into what the Romans used for the perfume, and it solved a pretty cool mystery that we didn't even know we wanted the answer to. Roman coins found in Japan. We've already talked about ancient Rome in this video, and we're talking about them again, because when we're talking about cool ancient history and ancient mysteries, they're worth bringing up. Now, one ancient mystery about the Roman Empire was exactly how far were their trade routes established. For example, it was known that the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty in China knew of each other's existences, but it was kind of believed that they had no formal relationship, and their only understanding of each other kind of came through the established trade route that was basically spread across all of Eurasia, which was the very famous Silk Road. Both the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire profited greatly from this trade route, but it still begs the question, how strong was the influence of the Roman Empire in Asia, specifically when it came to trade? And also, how far beyond the Han Dynasty did their trade go? And this mystery brings us to Japan in 2016, when a group of archaeologists were doing a dig and they found some weird little pebbles. But these weren't pebbles, these were ancient Roman coins from the 3rd and 4th century AD. These coins had Constantine the Great on them. And this discovery kind of made the mystery even bigger, because now the obvious question was, how did these coins get here? Who had these ancient Roman coins, and what were they doing in Japan? Were they trading? Were they stolen? Were they a gift? Who knows? But what archaeologists were able to kind of draw from this discovery was that the ancient Romans' trade influence had roots much deeper in Asia than they initially thought. And to think that this trade route went as far as the Japanese island is pretty cool. Could you imagine being one of the archaeologists on this dig? You find it, you're very well versed in ancient Roman history, and you're like, oh my god, this is a Constantine coin, I know this. And then you go to your friends, you're like, guys, I found an artifact. You're like, oh, what'd you find? I'm like, I found ancient Roman coins. They're like, where'd you find it? And then you have to go, Japan. And then instantly everybody you're speaking to thinks that you are the dumbest person alive, only for you to then be proved as a legend for finding such a cool artifact in such a unique place. Like, imagine if your friend just went on a trip to Italy and he's like, dude, I went on an excursion and I did an archaeological dig and I found this cool ancient samurai sword. I'm sure your first thought to your friend would be, oh man, bless my friend's heart. He thought a Roman sword was a samurai sword. But then he FaceTimes you only to show you that no, he literally found a Japanese samurai sword in, the Roman Empire. That's only how I can imagine this kind of conversation went. Because I definitely would assume that most archaeologists wouldn't assume that they're finding ancient Roman coins when doing a dig in Okinawa, Japan. The Tully Monster. The year is 1958, and you are an archaeologist working in the Mazon Creek fossil beds when you have just found a very interesting fossil. This fossil isn't like anything you've seen before, and it kind of looks like fossilized poo, an ancient, toy, some sort of large peanut. Whatever it was, you have never seen this before, and neither have any of your archaeological or scientific friends. Not only have they not seen this before, everybody was baffled and confused on what this fossil could be. And from the year 1958 until 2016, the origins of this 6-inch long, large wood-looking, bug-looking thing had no explanation. All anybody knew was that there was a hard outer shell, 2 eyes, 2 long stalks that protruded out of the head, but beyond that, everything was up for debate. But one of the hottest debates was whether this creature was a vertebrate or an invertebrate. But that debate was closed in 2016. And I just have to say, man, 2016 was such a good year for discoveries, because I feel like so many things we've discussed on this list have been from 2016. So shout out 2016. Honestly, just a good year all around. I was in high school at the time, just carefree, just having fun. I'm not one of those people that said high school was way more fun. I have a lot more fun now, I think. But high school, there's a certain charm to it. You have no responsibility in life. We're off topic. In 2016, after nearly 50 years of studying this thing, it was confirmed that this wooden-looking bug was confirmed to be a 307 million year old invertebrate creature. It was labeled as a jawless fish, and it had many similarities to the lamprey. Not everything is known about this creature, obviously, and work is still being done on the fossil, but the major points of contention are, case closed now. And this is an invertebrate creature that is literally 307 million years old. So crazy. Also, I find it kind of funny that the scientific name for the Tully monster is the Tully monstrum. Like, okay, you can put it in a suit. We all see through that. But in case I haven't shown any images of what artists think the Tully monstrum looked like back in the day, here are some images and renders. And I think that these look a lot better than the poo-looking fossil that was originally found. Oh, and I guess kind of a wholesome note, this creature is literally called the Tully monster because it was found by a man named Frank Tully. Look at this guy. Legend. The most haunted locations from around the world. I've touched on a lot of creepy things so far in this channel. Serial killers, mythical creatures, folklore, SCPs, but I've never discussed ghosts directly. But today, that changes. And I'm gonna answer all your questions about these haunted locations. Like, how did it become haunted? What ghostly encounters have been recorded? And are these places even really haunted? The year is 1835, and you have just been invited to a beautiful Christmas get-together at one of your friends' manors in the English countryside. The manor was just absolutely beautiful, and this party was packed with notable people, respected colonels, wealthy businessmen, and high-ranking government officials. The night consisted of seemingly endless food and drinks and music, and everything was just so perfect. Late into the night, once the party started to die down, you and a group of friends decided that it was time to go to bed, and you all went your own separate ways to get to your bedrooms. You turn down a hallway and you're finally by yourself and only steps away from your bedroom, when you notice down this hallway there's this woman, a woman that was wearing only brown clothing. You didn't recognize this woman from the party, but this isn't your house, and you didn't know everybody at this party, so you figured it was somebody else also going to their room. This woman was slightly notable due to the apparel that she was wearing, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and you continued to your room and had a good night's rest. You woke up the following morning on Christmas Eve and engaged in the morning festivities. The party was still not done. There was a huge brunch being served, and you and everybody else were not going to miss it. You sit down at a table with some of your friends, one of which being a colonel, and he mentions that last night he saw a rather peculiar woman. Another person at your table asks, what did she look like? And the colonel goes on to explain that on his way to his bedroom, he saw a woman dressed exclusively in brown robes. These robes were dated and tattered and had to have been at least from the previous century. It didn't look right at all. And the colonel was concerned because this woman might have been somebody who either snuck into the manor or was somebody who was obviously lost. But the colonel mentioned once he spotted this woman and walked closer to her and then tried approaching her, he realized this woman had turned around and he got a look at her face. And that's when he claimed that he saw this woman's bright white face with empty eye sockets, and the man was terrified. He didn't scream or run away, but he quickly made his way to his room without asking any more questions. Instantly, your heart dropped to your stomach because you also saw the same woman, but you didn't see her face. And before you could say anything, another woman at the table says, I also saw a lady dressed up in brown. I didn't see her face, but she was standing in the hallway, not saying anything and not moving. And your heart and stomach only sank deeper. You noticed that the host of the party was sitting beside you, and her face was in shock. You asked her, who is this lady wearing these brown rags? And she confessed that she had absolutely no idea. The Christmas party was a formal event and everybody was dressed in their absolute best. Nobody was wearing brown, and there was nobody in the party with sunken in, missing eyeballs. The host of this party quickly stands up on her chair and started clinking a spoon on her glass, causing the conversation in the room to a silence. And the host of the party asked, did anybody see a woman in brown robes anywhere in the manor last night? And to her dismay, numerous people in this room of nearly 100 people raised their hand. The story I just told is based on a real documented encounter that happened in 1835 at a Christmas party. And this story is significant because it is the first recorded sighting of the ghost that is now known as the Brown Lady at the iconic Raynham Hall. And this isn't the only sighting that's taken place, and it's probably not even the most iconic either. And only days after this event, when the host of the party made the staff aware of all of these claims, people literally quit their jobs and never returned out of fear of encountering this strange apparition. But that's not it. There was a handful of sightings on that night in 1835, but the following year in 1836, Captain Franklin Marryat, who is actually a friend of Charles Dickens, heard tell of the legend of this brown lady in the Raynham Manor and spoke to the owner directly and requested that he stay in the most haunted room of them all so he could prove that there was no ghost at all and that this legend simply came to be because the owner of this manor wanted to keep people away from his property. And let's just say he got more than he bargained for. This captain checked into the hotel and stayed in a room that literally had a painting of the apparition hung in the room. Like I mentioned, at this point, the Brown Lady was already a local legend and a common sighting within the hotel. And for the first 2 nights of his visit, the captain had a normal experience. He was staying in a hotel and rather comically was sleeping with a loaded revolver under his pillow just in case. And it was after the second night and the beginning of the third night when everything began to change. Because on night 3, Frederick didn't get a good night's sleep at all. What he did get was a run-in with the Brown Lady. Frederick had just gotten into bed and was ready to go to sleep when he noticed something in front of his door. The door never opened, but there was obviously a shadow of some sort in front of the door blocking the path. The shadow was moving and getting bigger until Frederick realized that this shadow was exactly what he was looking for. He quickly looked at the painting on the wall and noticed that this was the Brown Lady, and she was in his room and she was getting closer to him. Frederick grabs the revolver from under his pillow, points it at the apparition, and screams at the top of his lungs, "Stop! Don't come closer! I'm going to shoot!" But the Brown Lady grew a menacing grin and began to get closer, practically at the foot of his bed, when Frederick pulled the trigger, shot the revolver into the darkness, and the apparition disappeared. 3 hotel workers came into the room to ask what had just happened, and Frederick left the hotel and never returned. I tried to only tell one story per section, but I figured that story was kind of worth going into detail over. Over the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a plethora of other run-ins with the Brown Lady, which brings us to Captain Hubert C. Prevant, who not only had a run-in with the Brown Lady, but was able to capture a picture of her, a full-body apparition. And this photo is not only iconic to the Raynham Hall, but it's also one of the most iconic photos in all of ghost hunting. This photo was taken in 1936, and since this photo has been taken, sightings have been few and far between, although many people still believe to this day that Raynham Hall is haunted. Once again, just a crazy story, but you might be thinking, okay, sure, there's this ghost there, but who is this lady and how did she get there? And because this section's getting long, let me boil it down. According to the legend of the Brown Lady, the Townsend family, which was the family that owned the Raynham Manor, after numerous run-ins with this apparition, was able to identify her from one of the paintings that was displayed within the manor. The woman was named Dorothy Walpole, who lived from 1686 to 1726, and was the sister of Robert Walpole, who is considered the first ever Prime Minister of Great Britain. She was the second wife of Charles Townshend, one of the original Townsends that owned the manor, and this man was well known for having a short temper. Allegedly, this man had caught Dorothy with another man, a lord, and as punishment, he locked her in her room in the manor, and she was never allowed to leave. She wasn't allowed to see friends, family, or even her own children. She was a prisoner in her own home until 1926 when she passed away from smallpox. Obviously, that story is upsetting both ways, because if Dorothy did cheat, then that's awful. But Charles had absolutely no right to do any of that whatsoever. If somebody cheats on you, you just break up with them. You say, hey, you get out of my manor, we're done. You don't say, hey, I'm gonna trap you in this room until you die. To this day, Raynham Hall is one of the most iconic haunted locations in all of England. But this is one of the more tame entries on the list, and we're only just getting started. It's the mid-1800s, and you are a medical doctor, Dr. Charles Finney. You live in Atchison, Kansas, and you run a successful medical operation out of your home. This home was something your family recently commissioned, and now you were both living in it and making it your place of business, at least for now. And everything was going smoothly until one night. You were in bed, exhausted after a long day, with your eyes feeling like they're each 1,000 pounds, just begging to be closed. And as you're on the verge of sleep, about to drift off, you hear a knocking at your door. This was extremely uncommon. You obviously had no appointments in the dead of night, and you had no idea who this could be. Reluctantly, you get out of bed and head to your front door. And when you open the door, you notice a woman standing there, holding her young daughter. This woman is frantic and explains that her daughter is in severe pain, and she can't walk, can't move, and she is in endless, excruciating pain coming from her abdomen. The doctor's fatigue instantly wears off, and he's back in work mode. And he invites the woman and the daughter in, and quickly takes them to his basement examination room, where he's able to identify the likely source of all of this pain, an inflamed appendix that was about to burst. The doctor informed the mother that this young girl needed emergency surgery now, and the mother agreed, saying, please, anything to save my daughter. The doctor quickly prepped the location, washed his hands, grabbed his tools, and then began to administer the anesthesia. Once everything was ready and the medicine was administered, the doctor hastily made the first incision. Although little did he know, the anesthesia that he had administered was an improper dose, and this girl, who was already in pain, was now in even more pain, as she could feel everything. And this incision that the doctor had just made was the final straw. Her body went into shock, and not long after, she passed away on that operating table. That young girl's name was Sally, and this story is the reason why this location is known as the Sally House. First thing I'm going to say right off the bat is, as interesting as that story is, there is absolutely no recorded evidence for that story actually being true. And it's largely regarded as a folktale, loosely based in reality. Dr. Charles Finney was a real doctor, and he worked in Atchison, Kansas, and he lived out of his practice that his family had recently commissioned. That all is true. But as far as the story of Sally is concerned, there was no physical evidence. But the reason I mention the story is because it is the story that is most associated with this haunted location. And this haunted location is one of the most iconic in all of the United States of America. So yeah, I wanted to make that distinction primarily because I knew if I didn't, others would say that's not actually true, and well, it's not proven either way, but it is highly debated and not proven that it did happen, so I'll let you make up your mind on that. That story is upsetting and sad, but what does it have to do with haunted locations? Well, that story is kind of where everything began, because after this incident that may or may not have happened in the late 1800s, experiences in the Sally House have been vast and plentiful. Some experiences only consist of hearing a creak or faint footsteps, or even the giggle of a young girl. But other encounters are a lot more sinister, with items being thrown, loud screams being heard, and even visitors being scratched to the point of bleeding. Nearly every former tenant or owner of the Sally house that had been interviewed alleged to have experienced paranormal activity of some sort, typically with consistent attributes across all of the accounts, with some even claiming to see Sally in the window at night when it was known that nobody was home. If you're watching this video, you're probably into the paranormal, which means you've probably seen some of your favorite ghost YouTubers stay in this house. Sam and Colby, Nick and Ryan, Exploring with Josh, or even large-scale TV productions. All of these people have stayed in the Sally house and had unique experiences. So for that reason, I'm not going to go too much more into detail. But I will say this, the Sally house hasn't been anybody's personal residence since the 1990s, and in more recent times has been a popular tourist attraction, which kind of makes you think, is the legend of the Sally house real? Or do people just want to keep the story alive because there's a financial incentive? Regardless, the Sally house is regarded as one of the most iconic haunted locations in the United States. The year is 1885. You and your wife are pioneers in New South Wales, Australia, and you have just finished building a double-story late Victorian-style manor on the top of a hill overlooking your local town. This was you and your wife's dream homestead, and you built it with your very own hands. The construction was a labor of love, and now you could enjoy this manor for the rest of your life. This manor became known as the Monte Cristo homestead, and you and your wife enjoyed it up until your deaths. After you and your wife were long gone and your family had no longer lived in the residence, the house essentially was left abandoned. There were caretakers, but unfortunately, the Monte Cristo homestead fell into disrepair. That was until it was purchased by another couple, Reg and Olive Ryan, and they were dedicated to building this beautiful manor back to its former glory, and that's exactly what they did. They took it from a derelict, abandoned home to something that was actually habitable. And once again, the homestead was a home again. And it wasn't long after Reg and Olive moved in that things began to get weird. One late night, only a few days after the Ryans had officially moved in, they were heading home after an event, when they noticed that as they approached their house, they could see bright lights beaming from inside the house, illuminating all of the windows. This caught Reg and Olive's attention, and they were both speechless at what they were looking at. Reg knew that the electricity wasn't even fully finished in the house yet, and for the places that did have electricity, he knew he left no lights on and no lamps burning. Olive was just in sheer terror, and the couple stopped halfway up their driveway in pure awe of what they were looking at. Their home illuminated in the middle of the night for no reason at all. Terrified, the couple approached the house, and the closer they got, the dimmer the lights got. And by the time they actually reached their new home, the house wasn't illuminated at all, and it was as dark as it should have been. The couple theorized that maybe they were just seeing the reflections of the headlight of their vehicle, but deep down they knew that wasn't what they saw at all. And this was only the beginning of the strange encounters that were going to take place over the next few years. Following this event, when the family decided to bring their family cat to their new home, instantly the cat was uncomfortable, which is common. This cat's in a new environment and was just in a car ride, something it didn't enjoy. But as soon as your wife put the cat on the floor, it arched its back and moaned in fear as if it was face to face with another cat. There was nothing there. The cat hissed and screamed and immediately ran out of the house. You, your wife, and your 3 daughters looked for the cat and never found your cat again. Following that event, there was numerous occasions where your daughters claimed that they could see a man's face out the window, which was impossible considering that all of your daughters had bedrooms on the 2nd floor, and there was never any unknown men near or around the property. The family frequently encountered disembodied voices and footsteps and noises, doors opening and drawers closing, and there was truly no explanation for any of it. After years of alleged strange and ghostly encounters, the homestead was converted into a museum, where it showcased antiques, local treasures, and became a tourist attraction with a gift shop, and became known as Australia's most haunted house. Since then, it was featured in numerous TV shows in the 70s, 90s, and early 2000s and 2010s. But very recently, in January of 2025, the homestead was actually closed to the public as Olive Ryan passed away. The Monte Cristo homestead is likely one of the most famous haunted houses in all of Australia. And whether or not the paranormal experiences actually happened to Reg and Olive, or if they just made up stories to have a way to make money off of the house they just restored, I'll let you decide. The year is 1907, and the Dutch have just finished building a beautiful office building for their railway developments in Indonesia. Why the Dutch had a rail company and headquarters in Indonesia is a different conversation. But regardless, this building existed, and it looks really cool, and operated until 1942. That's because the Japanese invaded Indonesia, and they wanted everything, including this beautiful office building. You might be asking yourself, did the Japanese just use it as their office building? Now it's their headquarters in Indonesia? And the answer is no, because once they had total control of this building, they turned an entire wing of the building into a dungeon, specifically for torture and executions, something that wasn't uncommon for the Japanese in World War II. From 1942 until 1945, the building was under Japanese control, until Dutch forces tried to overtake the building from the Japanese. And in October of 1945, a battle took place within the building from Dutch troops who entered through a tunnel underground. Although the Dutch weren't only fighting the Japanese, they were also fighting the Indonesians. And the battle lasted 3 days, and the Dutch eventually retreated. Once World War II ended, the Indonesian army took control of the complex, and it was restored and given back to the Indonesian Railway Company, not the Dutch Railway Company. And in 1992, it was officially considered cultural property of Indonesia. From 1992 until 2009, this building was essentially left to rot, and over this time, it was vandalized, and nature had begun to take it back, with mold growing, parts of the building collapsing and falling apart, and locals beginning to have interesting stories regarding this building. This building, with quite the history, is known as Lawang Sewu, and it is considered one of the most haunted locations in all of Indonesia. Lawang Sewu is very interesting, and its history alone is something to be researched and talked about. During the time that this building was left in disarray, many local teenagers would make it a challenge to touch the building, or go near the building, or go inside the building, or even in extreme cases, stay overnight in the building. This massive building with such a dark and long history became a bit of an icon for all the wrong reasons, and everyone essentially considered it to be an evil, haunted building with dark energy and dark spirits associated with it, which kind of makes sense. Like, just imagine how dark the energy is being in a building, knowing the history. The unspeakable things that happened in this building, I could only imagine left some sort of energetic residue. Regardless, this building became very popular with thrill seekers in Indonesia. And it was over this near 20-year stretch when this building was falling apart that people had many strange encounters within the walls. Hearing voices, hearing footsteps, seeing apparitions, being scratched, being touched. All of these took place within the walls. The Indonesian government actually had plans of restoring this building, but were hesitant to do so because they feared that nobody would use or interact with the building because of the fear associated with it being haunted. But against their better judgment, they continued with the restoration project. And from 2009 to 2011, the building was restored. And in 2013, the building was officially open for tours. And currently, it's a massive hit for tourism in the region of Java, Indonesia, and sees over 1,000 visitors every single day. Now, here's the thing that's kind of interesting about this building. The government has official plans to, quote, eliminate the spooky image in order to attract more visitors, which I think is interesting because that's kind of the opposite of what most ghost house owners want, right? Like, they want to not only maintain but amplify the spooky image in order to bring in people. But I guess the difference is they are wanting to make this a historical landmark, but they are fearing that this image could scare people away, as especially in this region of the world, people are extremely superstitious when it comes to spirits. And there are plenty of locals that avoid this building entirely as they fear that going near or around this building could lead a spirit to follow you to your home and essentially bring you bad luck and negative energy. So yeah, Lawang Sewu over the last 120 years has had a very long and interesting and unfortunate history, including colonization, war, torture, executions, and other unspeakable things, I'm sure. But as the government allowed this building to sit and rot, the locals decided to have some fun and found a little bit more than fun. And today, the government has restored this building to make it a historical landmark and are doing their best to make sure that nobody talks about the whole ghost part of this building, which is kind of funny. Definitely one of the more obscure entries in this list. Before we get to the last entry on this list, I just wanted to make a quick point. Originally, this video was supposed to have 10 entries, not 5. But because it takes so long to animate the stories associated with each of these sections, I decided to just essentially cut it in half. I didn't want to sacrifice the storytelling or the information for the sake of having more entries on the list. I say this because there is a ton of other crazy, obscure haunted locations that I want to talk about. So consider this video a part 1, and if you guys want that second part, leave a like or leave a comment and I will post another video about the craziest and most obscure haunted locations from around the world. Now, back to the final entry of this list. The year is 1776. You are a healthy adult man living in Venice, Italy. You have a beautiful wife and a newborn son, and unfortunately you are experiencing the harsh wrath of the plague. It's killed numerous friends and family members of yours, but fortunately you, your wife, and your son are safe. for now at least, because you have to work every single day to be able to afford to live. Your family depends on you, and you try to be as safe as possible. That is, until you catch the plague. At this point in time, the government had a protocol for anybody who had caught the plague. And your fate was to be sent to the island of Poveglia, an island that at this point the Italian government was using solely as a quarantine station for those with the plague and other diseases. And that is where you went. You weren't able to say goodbye to your wife or son as it would pose too much risk to them, and you felt confident that if you went to this island, you would quarantine and come back a healthy man and return to your family. But unfortunately, almost as soon as you were shipped to this island, you were never heard from again. Your son was able to grow up through the plague and survive it. As time went on, the plague began to go away. Things began to change. One of the bigger changes that happened was the Italian government was no longer using Poveglia as a quarantine station, but as a remote mental institution. And unfortunately, your son, through the trauma that he experienced growing up in the plague, losing his father, and other hardships that he had in his life, found himself also on the island of Poveglia. This time, not because of the plague, but because of a mental disorder that was at the time not understood. The island of Poveglia at this point had claimed the lives of multiple generations in your family. But sadly, this wasn't unique to your family. Tens of thousands of people had perished on Poveglia Island. And it's because of that dark and death-filled history that Poveglia Island is regarded as not only one of the most haunted locations in Italy, but one of the most haunted locations in the entire world. From the late 1300s until the late 1900s, this small island was inhabited by people and used for multiple different reasons. The two primary reasons, the quarantine station and the mental asylum. There was likely an unspeakable amount of atrocities that took place on this island, and it's for that reason that after it was abandoned, people gained quite the interest in visiting it. The mental hospital was the last official use of this island, but when that institution closed in 1968, not only the building went abandoned, but the entire island became abandoned, leaving the buildings, the belongings, and the history to marinate. But it didn't take long for history buffs and thrill seekers to check it out for themselves. And that's when the legend began to grow of how haunted Poveglia Island really was. I've actually watched a video of somebody not doing a ghost hunt here, but just exploring the island. I believe it was Exploring with Josh I watched, and it's kind of unfortunate because although the history of this island is rather dark, the architecture is still beautiful, and the island itself is really unique. I could only imagine it would be a cool tourist attraction, kind of like the Italian version of Alcatraz. You know how that had a really dark history but became a popular tourist attraction. Even though this entire island has been off limits from the day it closed to today, it's not stopped people from going. And it appears that almost everybody who has gone there has come back with a story, which has led to numerous different paranormal TV shows and even paranormal YouTubers to explore the island for themselves. There are no real famous notable claims of hauntings or specific apparitions on this island. There is just a general consensus among people who have been there that there is no doubt that this island is haunted, which they back up with the history of the building itself. This is definitely an example of a haunted location that I'd be more willing to take seriously simply because there's no financial incentive. This isn't something that somebody owns. Nobody's really gonna make money off of making a legend out of this. It is an abandoned building with a dark history that I'm sure the Italian government just wanted to kind of decay into nothingness.